Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 366-380. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 366. It's a pity that we met too late. Why did you bring him here? Moon. Aemlyn frowned, his tone not very friendly. Leonard wasn't surprised by Aemlyn's reaction and explained. Mobit is a Beyander of the Marauder pathway. I think he should be able to help us. Help. Moon. Aemlyn's brows furrowed deeply, clearly disapproving of Leonard's explanation. Since Leonard had specifically called the other party over, it meant Leonard had great confidence in his strength. So, was this Mobert Zoroaster actually a demigod of the Marauder pathway? He remembered that sequence 4 of the Marauder pathway was called Parasite, right? Frankly, a demigod could indeed play a role. But the purpose of this operation was not just to hunt demigods, it was primarily the Tarot Club members' first offline gathering. Although Aemlyn felt that Leonard, being only sequence 6, wouldn't be of any help in this operation, he didn't even think of an excuse to refuse Leonard's participation. Instead, he figured that when the fight started, he could just let Leonard observe from the side. As long as he didn't cause trouble, one more observer wouldn't matter. The reason they chose to bring along Leonard, this burden, was precisely because Leonard was also a member of the Tarot Club. Since this operation was defined as a collective action of the Tarot Club members, naturally, not a single person could be left out. Otherwise, if everyone else participated in the operation and only Leonard was excluded, wouldn't it look like the seniors were ostracizing a newcomer? So, even if none of them believed Leonard could play any role, they didn't refuse his request to join the operation. And that's where the problem lay. The reason Leonard was allowed to join was because he was a member of the Tarot Club, not because of how strong he was. But now Leonard insisted on unilaterally bringing in a stranger, a demigod. What was this? Was he eager to prove his ability? Or to prove that he wasn't a complete liability to this operation? Admittedly, a demigod of the Marauder pathway could indeed provide some help, and might even play a crucial role. But none of that was the key. The key was that Mobit, in the final analysis, was not a member of the Tarot Club. He didn't even have the qualifications to participate in this operation. Even Aemlyn himself, as a Sanguine Count, the Sanguine Savior personally appointed by the Ancestor, and a Sanguine Pillar valued by Duke Olmer, still kept the Tarot Club a secret from the Sanguine. This was out of his allegiance to the Tarot Club and his respect for Mr. Fool. Every time he attended the Tarot Club, unless asked, he would not reveal any information about the Tarot Club. And even if Duke Olmer personally inquired, he would only disclose some less important information, and would not attempt to reveal the identity of other members, let alone expose content that could be considered secret even to angels, such as the 8 King of Angels, or important events related to the Age of Cataclysm. And Aemlyn also believed that the Sanguine would not overly pursue these minor details. After all, he was the savior personally appointed by the Ancestor, and the Ancestor had always treated Mr. Fool with an equal attitude, and had even specially dispatched him, this special envoy, as the hub for contact between the two forces. So the focus was never on what he heard at the Tarot Club, but on the fact that he was a member of the Tarot Club. As a Sanguine, Aemlyn had reason and necessity to protect the interests of the Sanguine, so he never hid his pride as a Sanguine, nor did he hide the curiosity of some Sanguine members about the Tarot Club, but openly told other members. Similarly, as a member of the Tarot Club, Aemlyn had always regarded the Tarot Club as Ashavir, gathering, showing great respect to other members, never trying to pry into their secrets, nor trying to betray the Tarot Club's secrets or harm the Tarot Club's interests. But what Leonard was doing now was truly harming the interests of the Tarot Club. This operation, organized by us, the Tarot Club members, invited you because you are a member of the Tarot Club. Yet you unilaterally invited others to join. Are you implying that the Tarot Club isn't being exposed fast enough? Or that the Tarot Club isn't strong enough and must rely on an outsider's help to complete this operation? Moon. Aemlyn's expression was incredibly gloomy, not hiding his dissatisfaction in the slightest. But he didn't speak rashly. Instead, he stared coldly at Leonard, waiting for his explanation. Facing the clearly somewhat angry Aemlyn, Leonard's expression remained calm. He slowly said, Mobit is Mr. World's friend. They once hunted the Blood Admiral together. Mr. World's friend. Aemlyn's expression shifted slightly, but his attitude remained unchanged. This was far from enough. He knew that Leonard and Mr. World likely knew each other in reality. Everyone in the Tarot Club knew. After all, the star's performance during his first participation in the tarot club couldn't have been more obvious. But what if he was Mr. World's friend? In the end, he wasn't a member of the tarot club. Leonard knew Emlyn wouldn't relent so easily, so he continued. He is the descendant of an angel. Who? Emlyn was unmoved. He had heard of the Zoroaster family, and it was not surprising that the Zoroaster family's ancestor was an angel. But so what? As if every family didn't have a few angels. The Sanguine had 3 Grand Dukes, a Blood Moon Queen, and Mr. Fool also had 7 great angels under him. An angel descendant. Was that very valuable? Leonard continued unhurriedly. You should have heard of that angel's title. He is the Time Angel. Emlyn's eyes immediately widened. He only knew 2 Time Angels. One was the former King of Angels, Time Angel Aemon, but he was currently preparing for godhood. The other was the honorific names of some angels under Mr. Fool, which Mr. Fool had personally told them about at the last Tarot Club meeting. And this Time Angel was one of them. Emlyn immediately ruled out the Aemon option, and at the same time confirmed that this Time Angel was indeed the angel under Mr. Fool. And since Mobit was a descendant of the Time Angel, didn't that mean he was actually one of them? Emlyn was still a bit hesitant. Even if he was an angel's descendant, even if the other party was a believer of Mr. Fool, he was still a bit different from them, the Tarot Club members. Should they bring him along or not? The star Leonard saw Emlyn still hesitating and added more weight. I asked Mr. World about this, and he agreed to my request. He wasn't a fool. What Emlyn could think of, he naturally could too. Although he also wanted to invite a demigod to strengthen his position, the premise, of course, was to get Mr. Fool's permission. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to let Mobit appear before Emlyn. After all, as an official Beander, Leonard knew the consequences of unilaterally inviting an outsider to an operation better than Emlyn. As for why he asked Mr. World instead of Mr. Fool, he naturally had his own considerations. Upon hearing the words, Mr. World, Emlyn no longer had any resistance or doubt. A smile immediately appeared on his face, and he proactively extended his hand towards Mobit. Hello, I'm Emlyn White. Although he found it a bit strange why Leonard asked Mr. World instead of Mr. Fool, it actually made no difference. Mr. World, as Mr. Fool's most valued favored one, and now one of the angels under Mr. Fool, his ability to respond to Leonard's prayer, to some extent, represented Mr. Fool's opinion. Mobit smiled and extended his hand to shake his, saying, Mobert Zoroaster. Amidst Emlyn's enthusiastic greeting, Mobit asked, When do we depart? We can leave now, Emlyn immediately replied. Mobit raised an eyebrow, and asked with a smile, Aren't we going to have a cup of coffee before we leave? Emlyn said righteously, Coffee can be had anytime, let's depart first. Heh, you didn't say that just now. Leonard expressionlessly watched the two interacting enthusiastically, scoffing inwardly. Hey, Sanguine. Emlyn ignored Leonard's disdainful gaze and pulled out a palm-sized notebook from his left coat pocket. Its cover looked very hard, bronze green, and appeared quite ancient. Leonard knew this was a mystical item called Lemonoo's Travel Notes. Although its level was only equivalent to a sealed artifact of 2 feet, its actual effect could reach a level infinitely close to a sealed artifact of 1. More importantly, the negative effects of this mystical item were very minor, merely causing the user to get lost and encounter various dangers after each use. Such negative effects could be eliminated by quickly drawing one's own blood and evenly smearing it on the cover. Rounding up, its negative effects only required the cost of some blood, and rounding up again, it had almost no negative effects. And such a powerful sealed artifact that would make even demigods envious was merely a shared item, that anyone in the Tarot Club could borrow. The first time Leonard saw this mystical item, he was incredibly envious, but he had just joined the Tarot Club and didn't want to rashly compete with others for the right to rent this mystical item. And to facilitate this operation, this magic book contained a large number of teleportation, Beander abilities. Whoosh! Lemonoo's travel notes in Emlyn's hand flipped rapidly, stopping at the teleportation page. The next moment, the figures of the three also became transparent and invisible, disappearing from their original spot. Rosaid C, aboard the future docked at Byam's private rebel port. The sudden appearance of Emlyn and the other two on the deck immediately put the sailors on alert, but with previous experience the sailors did not act rashly. And as expected, the captain's cabin door soon opened again. At Catlia's greeting, the sailors quickly put down their weapons, but their eyes still held some confusion. Where did the captain meet these people? Moreover, why couldn't you just honestly walk up the gangplank to board the ship? Why did you have to appear suddenly? Don't you know that can easily cause misunderstandings? Inside the captain's cabin, Alger glanced at Emlyn and Leonard, who were led in by Catlia, and raised an eyebrow, saying, Since everyone's here, let's have a meeting to discuss it. As he spoke, he dropped the cards in his hand, then leaned on the table to stand up, and, accidentally, pushed the table, mixing the cards together so they couldn't be distinguished. But soon, he saw the third person walking into the captain's cabin and couldn't help but frown. Who is he? He had met Mr. World and Lover, but this stranger was not among them. Leonard pointed at Mobert and explained. Mobert Zoroaster, he is also a believer of Mr. Fool, and his ancestor is an angel under Mr. Fool. He is here this time also at Mr. Fool's request. Emlyn glanced at Leonard, not exposing his little verbal trick. It was harmless anyway, let him be. Alger frowned for a moment, then his brows relaxed, and he proactively extended his hand to the other party. Alger Wilson. After introducing themselves, Alger spread out a map on the table, which Derek had already cleaned, and pointed to a certain spot, saying, "The Fasak Empire's Sonia Sea fleet is currently stationed in this sea area, their specific location unknown. But it's certain that they will choose to launch a surprise attack on Byam tonight." Is the information accurate? Leonard was instinctively a little suspicious. This was top secret. Alger said without hesitation, "Absolutely true. What's the reason?" Emlyn asked. Alger's mouth curved slightly upward, and he said, "The Fosak have reached an agreement with the Byam rebels. Both sides have agreed to attack and occupy Byam from inside and out tonight, cutting off the ruined kingdom's connection with its overseas colonies." Leonard frowned slightly. The reason was indeed legitimate enough. The ruined kingdom, facing the Fasak Empire's land offensive, if not collapsing at the first touch, at least was retreating steadily, with its defense lines breached multiple times. But at sea, due to having 3 of the newest ironclad fleets, plus the home advantage of the Roseate Sea, although initially a large number of ports and factories and one of the ironclad fleets were destroyed by the Fosak's surprise attack, the remaining 2 ironclad fleets still kept the overall situation in a stalemate. The ruined kingdom found it difficult to attack the Fasak Empire's Sunia Island and Gargaz archipelago, but the Fasak Empire also found it difficult to directly bomb the ruined kingdom's mainland through the Sonia Sea. Instead, several large-scale naval battles that broke out between the two sides ended in victories for the ruined kingdom. Under these circumstances, for the Fasak Empire to achieve a phased victory, occupying Byam was the best choice. Once Byam, the capital of the Rorstad archipelago, was occupied, the ruined kingdom's colonies in the Sonia Sea would be divided into 2, and the naval bases established on nearby islands would no longer be safe. Conversely, the Fosak could use Byam as a springboard to gradually encroach upon the entire Rorstad archipelago. This strategic layout, clearly favorable to the Fosak, was something even Leonard could see clearly. But the question was, how did Alger and his group know? Leonard had a guess in his mind and asked, "Do you have informants within the rebels?" Emlyn scoffed, causing Leonard to frown, but then he heard Alger slowly say, "To be precise, the rebels are now Mr. Fool's believers. And besides that, the Fosak have also contacted Star Admiral, hoping he can lead his fleet to attack Demir Port, to draw back the ruined navy." Faint. A word immediately flashed through Leonard's mind, but then he quickly thought, isn't Star Admiral the Hermit? The Hermit is a member of the Tarot Club, and the rebels are believers of Mr. Fool, yet the Fosak chose to cooperate with these 2 forces. Leonard was stunned. The Fosak truly lost without injustice. Chapter 367, Bullying the Weak. Under the cover of night and heavy fog, the Fasak Empire's Sonia Sea fleet was silently approaching Byam in the Roseate Sea. On the Fasak Empire's Sonia Sea fleet's flagship, the Nepos, Yegor Einhorn, a burly man over 2 meters tall with a thick mustache, sat behind a desk with a map, sipping Sonia blood wine and contemplating his next arrangements. The recent sneak attack destroyed many of Lowen's ports and factories, and the fleets docked in the harbors were also damaged. It's a pity that only one of Lowen's 3 ironclad fleets was undergoing repairs in Pritz Harbor, the other 2 fleets were out on missions at the time. Otherwise, if all 3 ironclad fleets had been destroyed, the Sonia Sea would have completely become an inland sea for Fasak. However, with only 2 ironclad fleets left, the ruined kingdom is already stretched thin. The Dissy Bay to the south must always have an ironclad fleet on standby to guard against a sneak attack from the Fainapotter kingdom, so only one ironclad fleet and its corresponding airship squadron can truly be deployed in the Sonia Sea. Directly confronting Lowen's ironclad fleet would be unwise. Although I am an iron-blooded knight and can concentrate the entire fleet's power on myself to share the damage, the commander of that ironclad fleet is likely a demigod of the Arbiter pathway, or possesses a corresponding Sequence 1 sealed artifact. They are not easy to deal with. If we're not careful, they could exploit their advantages in speed and naval artillery. In that case, my fleet would also likely suffer heavy losses, and the end result would only be mutual destruction. Since direct confrontation is unfavorable, we can only continue to attack coastal ports while the Loan Navy is damaged and temporarily short on numbers. But the Loan side must have made corresponding preparations, making it difficult to quietly attack ports and retreat unscathed. Moreover, stretching the front too long makes it difficult to receive support from other units, and it's easy to be cornered by the Ruined Kingdom's ironclad fleet in the West Sonia Sea, forcing a decisive fleet battle with the Loan side, which brings us back to the previous problem: we do not have the upper hand in a direct fleet confrontation. In this way, the strategic significance of attacking the Loan mainland is greatly reduced, and it would instead put ourselves in danger. In contrast, attacking Byam is undoubtedly the wisest choice. Ports like Pritz Harbor, located in the Ruined Kingdom's mainland, even if Fasak could destroy or even occupy these places, land support from the Ruined Kingdom would continuously pour in, attempting to retake the ports, and we, lacking supplies and support, would find it difficult to hold these ports. In contrast, Byam also has numerous ports and factories, but it is far from the Loan mainland, and has long been plagued by rebels. If we can occupy it, we can then cut off communication between the Ruined Kingdom's West Sonia Sea, Central Sonia Sea, and East Sonia Sea fleets. Any route along the way would risk being attacked by us. At that time, the Ruined Kingdom will only have two strategies. Either exert all efforts to retake Byam, or abandon Byam and all colonies in the East Sonia Sea, retreating to the West Sonia Sea. And in this way, Fasak can completely seize the initiative. Whether it's holding Byam and confronting Loan, or using Byam as a springboard to attack ports in the West Sonia Sea and the Loan mainland, the initiative is in our hands. The only difficulty is that Byam, as the colonial capital of the Ruined Kingdom in the Roseate Sea, is not so easy to breach. But fortunately, the Loan people's rule there has always been unpopular. I don't expect the natives to occupy Byam, but at least they can cause trouble for the Loan people and tie up most of their forces. By then, as long as the fleet successfully lands, Byam's fall will be inevitable. Haha, such a war is indeed a good opportunity to digest the potion. What a pity, I couldn't become a war bishop before this, otherwise, I might have had a chance to advance to the angel level after the war. Alas, only a war bishop can truly leverage the advantage of an army, unlike me now, who can only concentrate power on myself. As Yegor Einhorn's thoughts surged, he was about to use the hidden connection between the iron-blooded knight and his soldiers to summon his adjutant and instruct him on the night attack on Byam. Suddenly, Yegor's expression changed, because he could not sense the adjutant's presence. For a seasoned iron-blooded knight, this was absolutely the worst-case scenario. Because it meant either someone had silently killed his adjutant, or his connection with the adjutant and his subordinates had been severed. And neither of these was good news for Yegor. As a seasoned iron-blooded knight, Yegor instinctively considered the worst-case scenario and immediately tried to awaken the connection he had established with every sailor and every soldier on the Nepos. But all his struggles were like a clay ox entering the sea, receiving no response. Yegor's expression drastically changed, and he was about to rush out of the captain's cabin, but the next second he suddenly heard a roar. It was the roar of a cataclysmic enterer, enough to make even a demigod briefly lose their mind in its fury. Roar. In that roar, Yegor's ears buzzed, and his head spun. He instinctively wanted to share the damage, making every member of the Nepos slightly deafened. But the problem was, his connection with the other crew members had already been severed. Yegor gritted his teeth, enduring the dizziness and pain in his mind, grabbed the steel pen from the desk, and threw it towards the door. This dark red steel pen left afterimages in its path, like a launched cannonball. For an iron-blooded knight, even the most ordinary object could become a terrifying killing weapon with the enhancement of his unique characteristics. Bang! The door struck by the steel pen directly shattered, revealing the attackers in the corridor. There were 4 attackers in total, 2 men and 2 women. The lady with long, slightly curly brown hair retreated behind the other 3, because for her, she had already done what she needed to do. She used spatial concealment to separate the captain's cabin from the Nepos into 2 different spaces. And once this area was hidden, even a secret sorcerer themselves would only be able to exit through a door or by lifting the concealment, otherwise they would be blocked by an endless, profound darkness. This meant that until a victor was decided between the 2 sides, no one could leave the captain's cabin. The reason she was able to so smoothly use spatial concealment to separate the captain's cabin and the Nepos was also due to the Hermit M's Beyander ability. Having become a Sequence 4 mysticologist, she possessed a Beyander ability called Mystical Reappearance, which allowed her to create magic or witchcraft. The less people knew about the corresponding mystical knowledge, the more powerful the spell would be. With Bernadette, her adoptive mother, as her backing, she happened to know many hidden magical spells that were not widely known. for example, Nanki's dream. This Beander ability has an anti-divination and anti-prophecy effect, allowing everything that happens here to be perceived as a dream, and thus remain undetected for a short period. It was precisely because they belonged to different spaces that Yegor, this iron-blooded knight, had his connection with his subordinates severed. And an iron-blooded knight who cannot link with his subordinates is like a secret sorcerer who cannot use teleportation, a bizarro sorcerer who cannot use puppets, or a parasite who cannot use stolen abilities. Stripped of their strongest Beander abilities, they have almost no chance against other demigods, not to mention that he has more than one enemy. 4 demigods. Yegor's pupils contracted sharply. The demigods in this world were basically accounted for, but he simply didn't understand why 4 demigods suddenly appeared, nor why they wanted to hunt him. But he understood one truth, that he absolutely could not fight 1 against 4. So the only thing he could do now was to call for help. Yegor didn't hesitate for a moment, immediately trying to quickly chant the honorific name of the Supreme Commander of the Sonya Sea War Zone, who was a weather warlock from the royal family. But when he opened his mouth, trying to utter the weather warlock's honorific name, his mind suddenly went blank, his thoughts almost solidified. All the ideas and thoughts that emerged in his mind were instantly stolen by someone. He had no chance to call for help, and couldn't even come up with any self-rescue thoughts. And at this moment, Alger, who had just finished using Roar, also attacked. In his hand, he held a short staff made of white bone, its head inlaid with tiny azure blue gemstones, some stained with profound black, some veiled with dawn. Around it, countless pure light spots swirled, and illusory, ethereal prayers emanated from it, layering upon layer, displaying utmost divinity. That was the sea god scepter bestowed upon him by Mr. Fool, corresponding to the sequence 3 level. And Alger, now a cataclysmic enterer, was barely qualified to wield this scepter. Boom! Streaks of silvery white electric snakes darted out, and countless silvery white lightning bolts appeared, seemingly forming a sea of thunder. They carried a strong aura of destruction, as if they would annihilate the entire captain's cabin along with Yegor. Rumble. Amidst the rolling thunder, thick, dazzling lightning bolts fell either simultaneously or in succession, and the luxurious captain's cabin was instantly reduced to nothing. Blinding light enveloped Yegor within it, lasting for a full 20 seconds. As the silvery white lightning faded, the covered figure was revealed before them. It was Yegor, already charred to a crisp. His luxurious admiral's uniform was long gone, his flesh and blood, melted by the lightning, leaving only a curled-up lump of charcoal. But he was still alive, even though only a fraction of his flesh and blood remained, just a lump of charcoal, he was still stubbornly alive. The charred lips wriggled, as if trying to say something. But he never spoke, because his last obsession was once again stolen. At the sequence 4 level, a parasite no longer needs to make corresponding actions when stealing the opponent's thoughts. They can hold on to the stolen things and present them at the appropriate time. That's why Yegor couldn't even call for help. All his actions and thoughts would be stolen. No matter what trump cards he had, if he couldn't use them, everything would ultimately be futile, and he could only passively become a lamb to the slaughter. During this time, a long spear condensed in front of Hermit Catlia. This spear was ancient in style, stained with clumps and specks of blood red from tip to hilt. It emanated a strong aura of destruction and a bloody sensation, as if it had once harmed a great existence. With a whoosh, this terrifying long spear shot out, heading straight for Yegor Einhorn, who had been reduced to charcoal. Within the entire room, all sounds and details vanished, even the pervasive thunder abruptly disappeared, leaving only the blood-stained spear tip and the lump of charcoal on the ground, and the constantly shrinking distance between them. Spear of Longinus. That blood-stained long spear, which seemed to have appeared in an untraceable ancient era, absorbed all presence in the room and instantly pierced into Yegor Einhorn, delivering the final blow. No matter what backup plans he had, at this moment, they had lost all meaning. And Yegor, facing the siege of 4 demigods, with his own Beander abilities targeted and stolen, was able to hold on for half a minute only because Alger and their coordination was not yet proficient enough. Alger stepped forward, picked up the mystical items scattered on the ground by Yegor, as well as the Beander characteristic that had precipitated from his body, and looked around, saying, "Let's go." Upon hearing this, Furs dispelled the concealment of this space, and the boundless sea and the massive fleet on its surface immediately appeared before them. Just as she was about to use teleportation to leave, a large expanse of dawn light suddenly bloomed before her eyes. Fragments of dawn-like light erupted in dense, countless numbers from a nearby warship, forming a shimmering and violent sharp hurricane that swept towards the Nepos. That was the light storm of the warrior pathway. This sudden attack caught everyone off guard, but they still quickly made a decision at the first moment. Alger immediately raised the sea god scepter in his hand, and dense, intertwining silver-white sharp rays swept out. A violent tornado abruptly appeared, coiling up the azure seawater and the silver-white sharp rays, making them seem like a long snake, rushing straight into the sky, colliding with the seemingly countless dawn light. Boom! Water splashed, falling like rain. Furs did not hesitate, preparing to cast spatial concealment again, just as she had hunted Yegor earlier, to hunt the warrior pathway demigod who had attacked them. But at that moment, an anxious reminder suddenly echoed in her mind. Hurry up! Without hesitation, Furs changed her strategy, directly using teleportation, and along with the other three, vanished from the spot. And not long after they left, twilight quietly descended. Chapter 368, War. Backland, East Borough. Inside a safe house that Hugh had prepared in advance. Furs and the others appeared out of thin air, followed closely by Audrey and the rest, with a total of 9 people meeting in the living room. Was that the god of combat just now? Furs asked, still somewhat uncertain. Probably not. Alger shook his head, denying it. The one who acted just now should have been the god of combat's grand patriarch. The help of deities is not so cheap. As a demigod of the Church of the God of Combat, he should also know that he cannot ask the god of combat for help with everything. So most of the time, it is the grand patriarch of the Church of the God of Combat who manifests. Larian. Furs immediately recalled the grand patriarch's name. Leonard stood quietly to the side, silent. Not yet a demigod, he was not qualified to directly participate in the battle, but with the old man possessing him, he could serve as an insurance for this operation, which was also why Mr. Fool agreed to let him participate. However, they had originally thought this battle would be 8 against 1, with the advantage on their side. But no one expected that a Silver Knight of the Church of the God of Combat was hidden within Fursak's Sonia Sea fleet. As a Sequence 3 demigod of the warrior pathway, the appearance of the Silver Knight had both pros and cons. On one hand, the Silver Knight could conceal his actions and intentions, effectively interfering with divination and prophecy, preventing targets who could foresee danger from detecting him. Furthermore, the Silver Knight also possessed the Beander ability to hide by borrowing light, allowing him to merge into light and conceal his figure. This led to the fact that whether it was divination or prophecy, or even observation with the naked eye, it all showed that this fleet only had Yegor as a demigod. Therefore, they were completely unaware of the existence of this demon hunter before the operation, and were ambushed by him at the end of the operation. But also because the opponent was a Silver Knight, skilled in interfering with divination and prophecy, he failed to detect the anomaly on the Nepos, and did not detect that the captain's cabin and the Nepos were separated into 2 parts at the first instance. It wasn't until the hidden space suddenly returned to reality that the Silver Knight detected the anomaly. But by then, Yegor had already been killed. Even if the opponent was a Sequence 3 Silver Knight, facing 4 demigods was extremely difficult, and there was a chance of being overturned if he was not careful. Therefore, the Silver Knight ambushed Furs and the others at the first moment he discovered them, and at the same time, recited the honorable name of the Grand Patriarch of the Church of the God of Combat to seek protection. Fortunately, the old man discovered the anomaly immediately and reminded Audrey through Leonard. Audrey then used her Spectator Pathway Beander ability to remind Furs, allowing them to teleport away from the crime scene before the Grand Patriarch could respond. Of course, it was also a good thing that the demigod was a warrior pathway demigod and not a hunter pathway demigod. Because if it were an iron-blooded knight, or war bishop, of the hunter pathway, they would have immediately detected the spatial anomaly through the severed connection with Yegor. But conversely, if that demigod was of the hunter pathway, the opponent would not have the anti-divination and anti-prophecy Beander abilities of a Silver Knight. In that case, they could have made ample preparations in advance and hunted 2 demigods at the same time. Everyone in the living room fell into a brief silence, all reviewing and summarizing the battle that had just occurred. Mobit sighed, as if something came to his mind. These demigods with backing are indeed not that easy to kill. Alger said coldly. But Yegor is still dead by our hands. Leonard said with some regret. It's a pity we couldn't destroy that fleet, otherwise the situation in the ruined kingdom should be better. It's enough. Emlyn thought carefully and analyzed seriously. The death of a demigod is enough to throw the Fursaq Empire's troops into temporary chaos, especially since Yegor was the commander of the Sonia Sea fleet. His death will leave the entire Sonia Sea fleet leaderless, making it difficult to organize large-scale offensives in the short term, only able to passively defend. As long as the ruined kingdom's navy isn't stupid, they should know to seize this opportunity to expand their advantage as much as possible. Katlia gently shook her head. It's difficult. Such a war is not only desired by him, but also long awaited by the Einhorn family of Fursak. Through such a war that can affect the entire world, key members of the Einhorn can greatly digest their potions, preparing the corresponding rituals without too much difficulty, and their overall strength will rise to another level. For example, the ritual to advance to sequence 4 of the Hunter pathway is to form a team of at least 30 people, cultivate deep camaraderie with them, make them successively stronger, and cooperate tacitly, able to understand one's meaning through eye contact and actions, almost becoming one with each other, and then they form the ritual. At the same time, the stronger the team's strength and tacit understanding, the better the effect of the ritual. Such a ritual is not easy for hunters, who are good at provoking and enjoy plotting conspiracies, but correspondingly, once they complete the ritual, they will not only advance to sequence 4, but also transform into a qualified commander. Audrey softly added, that is to say, even if Yegor is killed, the Fasak Empire can send another, iron-blooded knight, in a short time to take over Yegor's duties, command the Sonia Sea fleet to continue fighting, and the combat power will not be significantly reduced. Emmeline White said indifferently. If that's the case, then wouldn't it be enough to hunt a few more demigods? Advancing to sequence 4 isn't just about having a ritual, it also requires corresponding Beander materials or Beander characteristics. I don't believe the Fasak Empire has an endless supply of Beander characteristics. Alger nodded silently, agreeing with this. As long as they take away the target's Beander characteristic every time they hunt, the Fasak Empire's usable Beander characteristics or Beander materials will inevitably become fewer and fewer. Moreover, as long as they act together every time, even if the Fasak Empire cultivates more demigods, it will be useless. Alger believes that no matter what pathway a demigod is from, it is impossible to survive under the close cooperation of 8 demigods from different pathways. Furs calculated the time and interrupted their discussion, reminding them, we should probably leave now. Everyone immediately became serious. Their target tonight was not just Yegor. Audrey smiled faintly. It's our turn to act this time. Previously, Furs and her 3 companions had hunted Yegor, and now it was time for the remaining 4 to act. As for Leonard, his spectator seat was unshakable. Northern Ruin Kingdom, Intersea Theater. Compared to the battles between the 2 countries' Sonia Sea fleets, the situation here was clearly more intense. The reason was also simple. If the Fosak wanted to invade the Ruin mainland from the Sonia Sea, they were destined to be unable to bypass the Ruin Kingdom's large overseas colonies such as the Rorstad archipelago, and had to slowly occupy them island by island. Moreover, with the existence of the Ironclad fleet, Fursak's Sonia Sea fleet might not even win. But the Intersea was different. Although it was called a sea, it was actually more like a huge inland lake. For the Fasak Empire, the Ruin Kingdom, and the Intis Republic, the distance from here to the other 2 countries was not far. And as long as the Fasak Empire successfully occupies Constant, the capital of Janai County, then whether it is marching north to join forces with the 2-headed giant army to capture Winter County, or invading Backland eastward, it would be an unbearable catastrophe for the Ruin Kingdom. The Fasak Empire was well aware of this, but the Ruin Kingdom also knew it perfectly well, so Constant and Janai County became the focus of offense and defense for both countries. The Fasak Empire was eager to occupy Janai County, which had an almost decisive impact on this war. And the Ruin Kingdom needed to defend Janai County and Constant at all costs, because they simply could not afford the price of losing them. Therefore, both countries invested a large number of troops in this battlefield. In the Intersea, Fursak's conquest fleet and the Ruin Kingdom's Intersea fleet had several large-scale naval battles, and both sides suffered huge losses. On land, the Fasak Empire had successfully landed on the coast of Janai County and began to invade inland. The Ruin Kingdom also had to take corresponding measures. While sending troops to encircle and suppress the Fasak Empire's landing forces, they also dispatched the Intersea fleet to cut off the sea supply lines of these landing forces, leaving them isolated and helpless. But in this way, the Intersea fleet would inevitably have another large-scale naval battle with the Conquest fleet, which maintained the sea supply lines. In this almost turn-based cycle, the war has continued to this day. However, as time passed, the scales of victory had inevitably tilted towards Fursak. Because the Intis Republic had launched an attack from the west, with several key fortresses in the Honachus Mountains as its main targets. In order to hold these key fortresses, the Ruin Kingdom had to transfer a large number of troops from the neighboring Civilis Shire to reinforce them. But this, in turn, led to a severe shortage of troops along the Intersea coast of Civilis Shire, making its defenses weak. Seizing this opportunity, the Fasak Empire's forces successfully landed in Civilis Shire and began to attack the neighboring Janai County. The only thing to be grateful for is that the Fasak Empire and the Intis Republic both maintained a tacit understanding, that is, not to let the other party reap the benefits. The current situation is that Fasak and Intis are attacking Ruin from the north and west respectively, while Fenboot is attacking Ruin's allies such as Leuenberg and Masik. Therefore, after landing, the Fasak Empire did not choose to penetrate deep into Civilis Shire, nor did it help Intis capture the Honachus Mountains, as if they wished Intis's army could be blocked outside Ruin's border, so that Intis would naturally not be qualified to share the Ruin Kingdom's cake. And Intis also did not send a fleet to help Farsak's conquest fleet, but instead watched from the sidelines, seemingly wishing that Farsak's conquest fleet and Ruin's Intersea fleet would perish together. It was also thanks to this tacit understanding of mutual scheming between the two sides, otherwise the Ruin Kingdom's battle lines would have collapsed even faster. Janai County, constant front line. Boom, boom, boom. Cannons belonging to Backland roared wildly at the front, sending shells trailing crimson, ethereal blue, silvery white, or deep black light hurtling towards the Fosak landing forces on the beach. But the next second, these cannonballs encountered an invisible barrier and exploded in midair, shaking that transparent wall. In the temporary command post at the front line, Alfred, the commander of the Constant Defense Zone and a lieutenant general of the army, watched all this with a grave expression. The Fosak had once again launched an attack on Constant. Although similar attacks had been repelled dozens of times, he still dared not relax. Not long ago, he was only an army colonel, but now he has served as an army lieutenant general, a commander of a war zone, which undoubtedly benefited from his promotion to sequence 4 feet imperative mage. Otherwise, no matter how great his achievements, he would at most be a major general, which is the limit that a non-demigod Beyonder can reach. Only Beyonders who have become demigods are qualified to serve as lieutenant generals, or even generals. But as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. As a lieutenant general, Alfred must constantly fight on the front lines against the Fosak, blocking the demigods that come to attack. If it were only one demigod, even a sequence 3 demigod, it would not be difficult for Alfred. Because all he had to do was defend, not hoping to kill that demigod. Fortunately, in terms of the number of demigods, the Ruined Kingdom generally had an advantage over the Fasak Empire. The number of demigods belonging to the royal families of both sides was similar, and the number of demigods belonging to the major Orthodox churches was also similar. But Fasak only had one church of the god of combat, while the Ruined Kingdom had the 3 great churches. Even if the Steam Church stood with Intis, they still had the support of 2 major churches, with nearly 10 more demigods than Fasak. Unfortunately, the Ruined Kingdom's enemies were not just Fasak. Although the demigods of the Fenboot Kingdom were temporarily contained by the Knowledge Church and countries like Leuenberg, not requiring them to invest too much effort. However, they still had to dispatch some demigods to Civilis Shire to fight against the demigods of the Intis Republic. As a result, the Ruined Kingdom, which originally had an advantage in the number of demigods, began to struggle. This led to Alfred often facing situations where multiple demigods attacked his defense zone simultaneously, and even with the blessing of sealed artifacts, Alfred still felt immense pressure. As he was thinking, Alfred looked at the distant beach. When the Ruined Kingdom's artillery became weak, the Fasak Empire began to counterattack. Under the command of the Fosak commander, the invisible barrier covering the Fosak landing forces was opened, and countless crimson flame spears leapt out, obscuring the sky as they were hurled towards the ruined position. These flaming javelins, as soon as they approached their targets, suddenly became chaotic, scattering and falling, embedding themselves in the ground, creating one black hole after another. The ruined side's attacks found it difficult to defeat the Fosak landing forces, and the Fosak's attacks likewise could not cause significant damage to the ruined position. All battles between these Beyonders would ultimately transform into the purest, most barbaric one-on-one combat. This is war. P.S. Roughly equivalent to Hextech Ultimatum plus Kennan's Ultimate plus Silence plus Greatsword plus 00000. The speakers are on, so taking them all out in one wave isn't too much, right? Chapter 369. You guys are really filthy at playing with control. This is war. Not far from the battlefield, Audrey murmured softly. Not only her, but the other members of the Tarot Club were also seeing such large-scale, collective Beyonder abilities for the first time, and they were somewhat shocked. This was an achievement that only national-level collectives could accomplish, and even Katlia, a pirate general, couldn't organize a large number of Beyonders for such a battle. Although they were only low to mid-sequence Beyonders, from the scene alone, it was even more spectacular than battles between demigods. This was because for most demigods, their battles were often secretive and strange, but never magnificent. When do we make our move? Emmeline White asked eagerly. He had only been able to watch the Hanged Man and others hunt before, and now it was finally his turn to appear, so he was inevitably impatient. Audrey gazed at the distant battlefield and said softly, "Wait. Wait for what?" Derek asked subconsciously. Hugh Dilcha calmly said, "Wait for the demigods from both sides to make their move. On the front lines of the Intersea, every battle involved multiple demigods. On the Lowen side, there seemed to be only one demigod, Alfred, on the surface, but in reality, other demigods were already on their way, or even hidden among the crowd, just waiting for the Faceac demigods to make their move. And since Faceac had decided on a large-scale landing, they must have sent a considerable number of demigods to cover this operation. If they acted rashly, they might be besieged by multiple Faceac demigods. And the Lowen side, being unaware and worried about a trap, would not dare to support them rashly. In that case, they would fall into the encirclement of the Fosac. Therefore, waiting was the best option. Suddenly, Audrey had an inspiration and looked a little further away. In the dense fog, a rather blurry, thick tentacle entwined with countless silver-white lightning bolts, rapidly extended towards a certain spot on the beach. And in the depths of the dense fog covering the sea, a huge gray-blue hand stretched out, holding a silver broadsword. The Storm Church's demigod and the Church of the God of War's demigod struck simultaneously. At the same time, darkness, almost solidified, silently swallowed the dense fog, and in that darkness, a slightly blurry giant figure appeared. He was generally humanoid but over 10 meters tall, with 2 arms extending from his ribs and 2 from his waist. And that dense darkness emanated from him. As this figure, seemingly from myth and legend, appeared, the Faceac army immediately fell into disarray. Every soldier and officer there felt as if they had returned to their childhood, walking alone on a dark road, with no one around, everything silent, making them feel an innate unease. The fear of the unknown, the fear originating from imagination, instantly caused their emotions to collapse. They turned around one after another, preparing to flee. But in the unseen, an invisible force connected them together. At this moment, they were like a single entity, giving them endless courage, making them no longer panic, no longer fear. They returned to their positions and launched a desperate charge towards the Lowen positions. Now, let's go. Audrey, who had been observing the changes on the battlefield, subtly shifted her expression. The magic book in her hand slowly opened, stopping at the teleportation page. "I'll go hold him off first." Emlyn didn't teleport with them but quickly said. Audrey didn't stop him, only watching his figure disappear under the crimson moonlight. When he reappeared, he was on the deep blue ocean illuminated by the crimson moonlight, and before him was the Faceac's massive conquest fleet. The fleet, composed of hundreds of warships, moved majestically. The cannons on the decks poured fire onto the Lowen positions on the beach, while also receiving the enthusiastic cannonballs fired from the shore defense guns at the Lowen positions. Emlyn's gaze didn't pause, quickly locking onto the largest warship. That was the flagship of the Faceac conquest fleet, the Admiral Norton. Before Emlyn could react, his expression suddenly changed. His body rapidly dematerialized, tinged with light red, and turned into a hazy moonlight. This moonlight instantly shattered, transforming into crimson scales, and dissipated on the spot. Moonlight transformation. This was a Beyander ability that the Sanguine possessed at the Viscount level, and for a sequence 4 feet Sanguine count, it had already become an instinct. And just as his figure dissipated, the conquest fleet's cannons roared in unison, deafeningly, and overwhelming artillery fire covered his original position from all directions. Under the blessing of the War Bishop's Beyander ability, these cannonballs possessed unparalleled lethality. If Emlyn hadn't managed to dodge just now, even as a demigod, he would have been severely wounded. On the deck of the Admiral Norton, under the crimson moonlight shrouding the deck, crimson scales quickly reassembled in the distance, coalescing into Emlyn White, clad in a black robe and hood. He stared intently at the man standing at the captain's cabin door. Franz Einhorn, a member of the royal family, an admiral of the Faceac Empire Navy, commander of the conquest fleet, a genuine war bishop, absolutely not comparable to a sequence 4 useless person like Yegor. For Beyonders of the Hunter pathway, there was a world of difference between a sequence 4 iron-blooded knight and a sequence 3 war bishop. An iron-blooded knight could only gather the strength of the army onto himself, while a war bishop could truly leverage the advantages of an army. But it was precisely because hunting Franz was difficult enough that it had to be his, Emlyn's, turn to appear. Franz Einhorn stared intently at the pair of red eyes under Emlyn's hood and said in a deep voice. Sanguine. Or Rose School of Thought. What are you doing here? Red eyes were a mark of the Sanguine, but for Beyonders of the Moon pathway, once they reached the sequence 7 vampire level, their eyes would irreversibly turn red, so it was difficult for him to judge the other party's identity and position based solely on pathway and eye color. What's more, whether it was the Sanguine or the Rose school of thought, they shouldn't have much conflict with the Fasak Empire. Why would the other party appear here? Could it be that he came to seek cooperation? It should be, otherwise he wouldn't be here to assassinate him, right? After all, a Sequence 4 demigod wanting to assassinate him seemed unreasonable no matter how he thought about it. Emlyn's lips curved slightly. He didn't answer Franz's question but slowly raised his hand and unhesitatingly dug out one of his eyes, an illusory eye, a scarlet eye. This eye shimmered with clear and crimson light, instantly illuminating the entire warship, as if a red moon had descended here. Its pupil reflected the man dressed in the Fasak general's uniform. Immediately after, Emlyn clenched the hand holding his eyeball, allowing the crimson, moonlight, to be completely swallowed by darkness. Deep, solidified darkness then emerged around Franz, binding him in place, making the scene there appear as if frozen. Franz's pupils constricted slightly, already realizing something was wrong. But being confined, he couldn't break free in a short time, he could do nothing. Yet, even so, his heart was still filled with confusion. So what if he was confined? Did a Sequence 4 demigod really think he could kill him? After all, although he was confined by darkness, his Beyonder abilities were not interrupted. He was still integrated with the entire fleet, and the entire fleet could share the damage he took. All Beyonders and sailors in the entire fleet could become his avatars, sharing his power and equally distributing the damage he sustained. Under these circumstances, even if his main body was confined, it would still not affect a war bishop from exerting his true strength. If that was the case, what was the point of the other party's painstaking efforts to create all this? Or did the other party have allies? Franz's expression subtly changed, and he immediately prepared to communicate with other crew members and sailors. But before he could give the order, a majestic voice suddenly rang in his ear. Mental communication is forbidden here. The petite lady stood on the right side of the gunwale, pointing her finger at the area where Franz was, solemnly establishing the rule in Hermes. At the same time, an invisible force descended upon the Admiral Norton. That invisible force severed Franz's connection with the fleet and the sailors, and also cut off the power transmission channel that had always linked them. This sudden change caused Franz's pupils to shrink sharply. The cooperation of a shaman king and an imperative mage, even if both were only Sequence 4, still posed a fatal threat to him. Having lost his most core Beyonder ability, he was not much stronger than an ordinary Sequence 4 Beyonder. He had to save himself immediately. But at this moment, an unimaginable aura penetrated the wooden armor and surged into the Admiral Norton, instantly enveloping every corner. Every sailor on board, including Franz, was simultaneously intimidated, their bodies, minds, and spirits all in an uncontrollable state. This was a qualitative change of dragon's might, this was mind deprivation. Franz, who had just been trying to save himself, instantly went blank. He didn't give up thinking, but he simply couldn't think. And Derek Berg, who had long been prepared, didn't waste this opportunity. Brilliant light gathered in his hand, forming a sphere of no darkness that seemed to be composed of pure sunlight, utterly pure and intensely white. He swung his arm and hurled it at Franz, who was confined by darkness. The spear broke through the darkness's confinement, restoring Franz's freedom, but before he, suffering from mind deprivation, could even feel the breath of freedom, the spear had already pierced his chest. The brilliant light suddenly expanded, completely engulfing Franz's figure. But this was not the end. No one would be so foolish as to think that this single blow could kill a Sequence 3 demigod. Audrey had already quietly invaded Franz's mind island through the vigilant subconscious ocean, planting a seed called madness within it. Light and darkness are relative. The moment the spear of no darkness harmed Franz, the confinement of darkness had already been broken. And with Franz's efforts to save himself, Hugh's prohibition was also broken through by Franz, and he re-established contact with other sailors. Severely wounded, he was eager to restore this connection. He wanted to use it to share the damage he received and to gather the strength of the entire fleet. As long as he could successfully connect with his fleet, none of the demigods attempting to assassinate him would escape. However, just as he re-established contact with others, the plague called madness began to spread wildly throughout the fleet. That was the infectious madness Audrey had planted in his mind island. This madness infected every warship and every sailor in the entire fleet. And these tiny bits of madness gathered together, along with the sailor's strength, converging within Franz's body. This infection originated from Franz's own being. It was a pollution that already existed within him, and Audrey merely amplified it. This also meant that even an angel's blessing could not isolate this pollution. This was a high sequence ability of the spectator pathway, the Dreamweaver's plague storm. That plague storm from the spiritual level was the most concealed and the most dangerous. Even for angels, such an attack was most insidious, because their mental states all had certain issues, and they could lose control at any time due to the scales tipping. And Franz was only a Sequence 3, and a severely wounded Sequence 3 at that. When he gathered the madness of everyone in the entire fleet, losing control was already his destined outcome. This was why, even though they knew Derek's son would break Emlyn's eye sacrificing confinement, and why Hugh could have tried to strip Franz of his Beander abilities in addition to the prohibition, they still acted this way. Because from beginning to end, the key to this hunt was not them, but Audrey, who was already a dream weaver. Audrey, in her dragon form, spiraled in the sky and flew above the Admiral Norton. She opened her massive mouth, preparing to unleash mind breath. She didn't want to give Franz, infected by the mental plague, any chance to breathe. Even if he had already lost control, she had to ensure his death. At the same time, Derek had already condensed the Spear of No Darkness in his hand, Emlyn had condensed the Blood Moon arrow under the moonlight, and Hugh clenched his left fist, pointing at Franz, who was already mutating in his loss of control, and majestically declared, "Death." The Spear of No Darkness and the Blood Moon arrow pierced Franz's body, but new Spears of No Darkness and Blood Moon arrows quickly condensed again. This accelerated Franz's loss of control, causing the Faceac Admiral to completely mutate into a monster, and the Mind Breath immediately followed, covering him. Coupled with Hugh's declaration of death under multiple blows, this out-of-control monster could only gradually lose its life amidst mournful cries. When the moonlight and light dissipated, when the Mind Breath ended, when Hugh retracted his hand, Franz had disappeared, leaving only the gleaming Beander characteristic. The entire Admiral Norton, the entire Faceac Conquest fleet, was utterly silent, with no sound, no roar of artillery. Therefore, every member of the entire fleet was contaminated by madness through Franz's link, and succumbed to death in their loss of control. The entire Conquest fleet, apart from the Faceac ground forces who had successfully landed on the beach, had no other living person. Emlyn looked around. Even he couldn't help but swallow. This wasn't just one or two people, but tens of thousands, even over 100,000 people dying at the same time. The spectator pathway is truly terrifying. Chapter 370, A Conspiracy. There must be a conspiracy. Backland, West District, Hall family's luxurious villa. When Audrey returned, Count Hall was still talking with Hilbert in the study, Mother was tallying the family's assets and stockpiled materials, and the servants were orderly handling their respective affairs. When Audrey returned to her room, Susie, the golden retriever, sat at the door, wagging her tail. No one noticed that she had been gone for a while. No one knew that just now, she had personally witnessed the deaths of 2 demigods, and had even personally hunted one of them. This made Audrey feel a little pleased, because it would greatly reduce the war pressure on the Lowen side, and also reduce casualties. John County, constant front line. What exactly is going on? On the Lowen position, Alfred, the commander, frowned slightly as he gazed at the endless Fursac fleet stretching across the distant sea. He had, of course, noticed the anomaly of the Fursac conquest fleet. From just now, the conquest fleet had suddenly stopped bombarding the Lowen positions, which undoubtedly caused heavy losses for the Fursac landing forces who had lost artillery support. The Fursac troops who had managed to rush onto the Lowen positions earlier were also driven back to the beach. And most critically, the conquest fleet not only stopped shelling, but even the subsequent landing forces that should have been transported to the beach showed no movement. Alfred's first thought was that something might have gone wrong with the Fursac conquest fleet, and that multiple demigods had assassinated Franz Einhorn, the commander of the conquest fleet. This was undoubtedly a good opportunity for Lowen to counterattack. But his second thought immediately made Alfred suppress this impulse. He did not rashly order his troops to change their actions, but continued with his previous deployment, gradually eroding the Fursac landing forces besieged on the beach. Because he was worried that this might be a trap. After all, Franz Einhorn was a Sequence 3 war bishop. With the blessing of the entire conquest fleet, how could he be so easily killed unless an angel personally arrived? And from the time the anomaly occurred until now, less than 2 minutes had passed. No matter how powerful the opponent was, Franz, the war bishop, wouldn't be unable to hold out for even 2 minutes, would he? It was precisely this line of thought that made Alfred worry that this might be a trick by the Fursac, perhaps intending to lure them into actively attacking, stepping into a trap set by Fursac, and then wiping them out. That's why he chose to hold his ground and stabilize the front line. He would rather do nothing than make a mistake. This actually did not conform to Alfred's character. The reason he was able to be promoted to army colonel at such a young age was because he dared to fight and take risks when serving in East Balam, preferring to make mistakes than do nothing at all. But the longer he was involved in this war and the more troops he commanded, the more cautious he became. Because the pressure he bore was simply too great. He needed to be responsible for the lives of hundreds of thousands of ordinary soldiers under his command, responsible for Constant behind him, and responsible for his family and friends far away in Backland, under his protection. So he would never advance rashly. As long as he held the position, it would be a victory. Alfred originally thought so, until he found that the frequency of battles between those demigods became lower and lower, until those demigods belonging to the Fursak side suddenly left the battlefield without any warning. These Fursak demigods abandoned tens of thousands of Fursak landing troops on the beach and fled for their lives alone. The Loan demigods who had lost their opponents also felt baffled, but most of them instinctively thought there might be a trap, and did not rashly pursue. Instead, out of caution, they immediately returned to the command post to discuss countermeasures. Alfred looked at the old man who had returned to the command post first and asked in a deep voice, "God of songs, do you have any idea about the Fosak's unusual movements?" The old man, dressed in a black robe embroidered with a storm symbol, wearing a black soft hat, and with unusually serious silver eyes, frowned and said, "Something seems to have happened to the Fursak conquest fleet, but I suspect this might be a Fursak trap." Alfred nodded silently, which was consistent with his guess. Emperor Rosal, who established the Intis Republic, once made a comment about the Fosak. Fursak soldiers are fierce and cunning, Fursak generals are cunning and fierce. Alfred actually disagreed with many of Emperor Rosal's words and actions. But only this sentence, Alfred deeply resonated with. As a country that produces a large number of beyonders of the hunter and warrior pathways, the people of this country inherently possess a barbaric disposition. On one hand, they consider themselves descendants of giants, not ashamed of barbarism but rather proud of it. On the other hand, many of their hunters have brought the name of their sequence potion to its extreme. These seemingly barbaric warriors are not mindless but are instead filled with various conspirators. Especially on the battlefield, the Fosak most like to use conspiracies to lure the Loan side into traps. In this regard, the Loan have enough say, because they have had enough painful lessons. Therefore, when faced with the obvious anomaly from the Fursak side, Alfred still remained extremely vigilant, as he had also suffered losses in this regard. And God of Songs A Snake also deeply resonated with this, which is why he made the same assessment as him. Soon, the demigods of the Church of the Night and the royal family successively returned to the command post. 4 demigods gathered together to discuss how to deal with this anomaly, which was likely a conspiracy. Ultimately, their conclusions were surprisingly consistent. Do nothing. As long as the Fursak conquest fleet remained anchored offshore, they would do nothing. Because if something had truly happened to the conquest fleet, even if Commander Franz Einhorn was dead, at least the remaining sailors and adjutants would command the other warships to retreat, instead of remaining anchored within range to bombard the Loan positions as they were now. So, this must be a conspiracy. The Fosak were luring them to the conquest fleet, luring them to investigate the situation of the flagship Admiral Norton, and there must be traps on board sufficient to harm these demigods. Therefore, they didn't need to do anything. Since the Fosak were using those tens of thousands of landing troops as bait, they would first consume this bait. As for taking the bait, that was impossible. If Admiral Amiros's Intersea fleet were here, they might try to probe. But now Admiral Amiros's Intersea fleet was entangled with the Fursak conquest fleet's second detachment, making it difficult for them to provide support before dawn. And since there was no naval support, Alfred didn't even consider probing. Because without a navy, they would find it difficult to prevent the Fursak conquest fleet from escaping, and even probing would only needlessly waste soldiers' lives. The Loan side, having determined their central strategy, quickly launched a large-scale encirclement and annihilation of the Fursak landing forces. Simultaneously deprived of support from both the conquest fleet and demigods, the Fursak landing forces were like ants without a leader, completely annihilated by the Loan side in less than an hour. Under the cover of night, the Loan soldiers began to clear the battlefield and repair the damaged defensive fortifications. Despite it being wartime, the latter half of this night was surprisingly quiet, with only the occasional sound of Loan's coastal defense guns unleashing fire on the conquest fleet. And the conquest fleet remained in the near sea, neither counter-attacking nor retreating. Even though many ships were destroyed by coastal artillery fire, they still showed no movement. This situation continued until dawn, until Admiral Amiros's Intersea fleet arrived on the battlefield, cutting off the conquest fleet's retreat. And even facing a situation of being attacked from both front and back, the Fursak conquest fleet remained quietly floating on the sea, motionless. Then, the Loan side discovered an astonishing fact. The conquest fleet didn't move, not because they didn't want to move, but because they couldn't move. The entire fleet, hundreds of warships, had no living people. The tens of thousands of sailors on board had all died last night, in that 2-minute anomaly. When Alfred personally confirmed all of this, his expression was still somewhat stunned, but he quickly breathed a sigh of relief. The anomaly last night was not a trap, the Fosak had indeed suffered huge losses. But he did not regret his decision. Because even if he had ordered a counterattack at that time, the outcome would not have been much different from now. Early morning, inside the Hall family's luxurious villa. Audrey was having a delicate breakfast with her parents and brother, but just then, a servant suddenly burst in and handed a folded telegram to Count Hall. Count Hall's expression changed slightly when he saw the telegram written on special stationery. That kind of stationery was specifically used for military intelligence. This was a telegram from the front line. However, given the current deteriorating situation on the ruined kingdom's front line, there was no need to think twice to know that it would certainly not be good news. He didn't want to ruin his breakfast mood, and also with the thought of giving Hilbert some experience, he slowly said, "Give it to Hilbert." The servant immediately handed the telegram to Hilbert, who recognized the stationery style and opened it with a serious expression. But soon, Hilbert's expression changed from serious to astonished, then to disbelief. Count Hall's heart sank when he saw his expression, as he had already anticipated that the intelligence in the telegram would not be good. However, the next second, an uncontrollable joy and excitement suddenly appeared on Hilbert's face, and he said excitedly, "Father, you have to see this." Count Hall was startled, took the telegram, and scanned it, taking in its contents. Unlike the defeat he had anticipated, the intelligence in the telegram was a great victory for the Lowen side. Forsak's Sonia Sea fleet appeared near Byam, the capital of the Rorstad archipelago, last night. It was discovered by a patrolling ironclad fleet and pursued all the way to Nass, causing heavy losses to the Sonia Sea fleet, and its commander, Yegor Einhorn, was also unaccounted for. And in the Intersea direction, the Lowen side also repelled the Forsak attack, annihilating hundreds of thousands of enemies, including half of Forsak's conquest fleet. Count Hall almost immediately realized the importance of this battle. The casualties of the army were not important, what was important was that half of the conquest fleet. Forsak, having lost half of its conquest fleet, would find it difficult to launch large-scale offensives in the Intersea direction as before. Because the Lowen Kingdom's Intersea fleet could completely suppress the conquest fleet, and even counterattack the Forsak Empire's homeland. Good. Count Hall stroked his handsome mustache, an uncontrollable expression of excitement appearing on his face. Since the war began a month ago, this was the only good news he had heard. Although this could not reverse the tide of war, it could at least stem the decline and allow the Lowen side to hold out longer. And as long as they could hold out longer, even if they were destined to lose the war in the future and had to surrender to Forsak or Intis, they would be able to negotiate for more benefits. Audrey saw that her father was in a good mood, and with a slight turn of her green eyes, she asked curiously, "Dad, is there any good news?" "It's good news." Count Hall handed the telegram to Audrey, smiling and saying, "Your brother, Alfred, has rendered great service. Not only did he repel the Forsak attack, but he also cooperated with Admiral Amiros to annihilate the invading conquest fleet. This will buy us valuable buffer time. Even the balance of this war will begin to tip from now on." Although he said so, Count Hall actually did not hold out much hope. After all, Forsak's navy only suffered heavy damage, but its army only lost tens of thousands, which was negligible compared to its total of several million. The naval losses only slowed their pace of attack in the Intersea and Sonia Sea directions. But on the Amantha Mountains defense line north of Winter County, Forsak's attack was still fierce, not to mention the two enemies, Intis and Fenboot, who were eyeing them covetously. Unless they could annihilate the main force of the Forsak Empire in one fell swoop and take the opportunity to counterattack its homeland, they would actually find it difficult to win the war. Audrey carefully read the contents of the telegram and found that both battles omitted the help of unknown demigods, as if everything was the Lowen's own effort. Audrey was not surprised by the content of the telegram. After all, if the truth were written, it would make the Lowen side seem like they were merely taking advantage, which would not achieve the purpose of boosting morale. The Lowen Kingdom, which had been suppressed for a long time, also needed a great victory to inspire its people. This is a good thing. Audrey showed a heartfelt happy smile, because this would at least save more lives for the Lowen Kingdom. Although Audrey felt somewhat conflicted about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Fosak, she did not regret it. This was war, and one side always had to pay a price. She didn't want her family and friends, or her country, to pay that price, so only the enemy could sacrifice. Moreover, Forsak was already the invader, and their deaths were better than the deaths of innocents. 371 I think it's okay. At 3 p.m. on Monday afternoon, in the ancient palace above the Fool. Crimson rays of light rose and solidified into different figures. Since arriving at New Silver City, son, Derek no longer needed to count his heartbeats. He only needed to glance at the wall clock and calculate backland time to know how long it would be until the Tarot Club meeting. At this moment, he stood up with Justice Audrey and, along with the other members of the Tarot Club, bowed to the head of the bronze long table, saying, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Leonard also bowed with the other members, and as he bowed, his gaze fell upon the figure beside Hanged Man. Without any introduction, he immediately recognized the person as Lover, who had not attended the Tarot Club meetings in previous times. Leonard's eyes flickered, and he subconsciously compared Lover's figure to Ash Black's. Justice Audrey asked curiously, "Mr. Lover, have you completed what you needed to do?" She knew that Ember's long absence must be related to something he needed to do, as this was not the first time. However, even she couldn't help but be curious about what Ember and Mr. Fool were planning. Upon hearing Justice's question, all other eyes turned to Ember. Clearly, they were just as curious. Previously, they were only beyonders of low to mid sequence, and they knew very well that they weren't even qualified to know such things. But now, most of them had become demigods. Even if they weren't qualified to participate, they could at least learn some details, right? Ember did not hide anything and calmly said, "Almost." Hanged Man Alger's brows furrowed slightly. "Almost. What exactly are Mr. Lover and Mr. Fool planning?" He knew this likely involved secrets between deities and understood he wasn't qualified to participate, but he couldn't help but speculate. Of course, it was limited to speculation. Even though they had become demigods, and even though they were incredibly curious, they all knew what restraint meant, restraining their curiosity. If Mr. Fool and Mr. Lover wanted them to know, they would inform them proactively. And if neither Mr. Fool nor Mr. Lover mentioned it, they wouldn't be so tactless as to pry. After all, not everyone was like Justice Audrey. Justice Audrey seemed to guess what others were thinking and proactively changed the subject, saying, "Everyone, the last operation was a great success. The Lowen Kingdom seized the opportunity to launch several counterattacks, all of which achieved good results. However, just as Hermit, Ms. had predicted, the Fosak quickly filled the vacant commander positions." The star Leonard pondered for a moment and asked, "Do we know who exactly?" Hanged Man Alger spoke in a deep voice. "The one who replaced the Sonia Sea Fleet commander is Kirill Einhorn, a Sequence 4 Iron-Blooded Knight. When Yegor died, that demigod from the Church of the God of War took over command and immediately ordered the fleet to retreat. Overall, the Fosak Sonia Sea Fleet suffered very little damage, and the impact on the war situation was minimal." Justice Audrey continued, "The current commander of the Intersea Fleet is Vice Admiral Dmitriev, who previously served as the commander of the Fosak Conquest Fleet's Second Flotilla." Second Flotilla. The Tarot Club members pondered, not particularly surprised by this information. After all, unlike the Sonia Sea Fleet, which only lost one main commander, the main force of Fosak's Conquest Fleet was almost completely annihilated. The Second Flotilla survived because it was small and tasked with harassing the Intersea Fleet, engaging in low-intensity, guerrilla warfare, with them in the Intersea to slow their speed of support to the constant front. However, the complete destruction of the main force left the surviving Second Flotilla as the Conquest Fleet's only remaining main force. And the hundreds of warships that were originally the main force are now in the hands of the Lowen. Their appearance can be described as a gift from nature, greatly enhancing the strength of the Intersea Fleet. With this ebb and flow, the Intersea Fleet, holding a decisive advantage, naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity and has been actively attacking these past few days. The Fosak Conquest Fleet, having lost most of its warships, no longer has the qualifications to engage in a decisive battle with the Intersea Fleet. Under the suppression of the Intersea Fleet, the remaining Second Flotilla doesn't even dare to leave port now. This has led to not only the constant coastline being affected, but also the Fosak troops who had already landed in Civilis Shire being encircled. With their sea supply lines cut off, they have become completely isolated. And the reason for the current situation, the members of the Tarot Club involuntarily looked at Justice Audrey at the same time. It was precisely thanks to Justice Audrey's mental plague that tens of thousands of Fosak troops on those hundreds of warships were completely wiped out. It's no exaggeration to say that the deaths of these tens of thousands of people caused even greater losses than the death of Commander Franz Einhorn, and were even harder for the Fosak Empire to accept. Demigods can be cultivated again, and even mass-produced in a short time with the help of war, but fleets and sailors cannot. Both require years of accumulation and construction, they cannot be rebuilt overnight. Even if Faceac's war machine is running at full power, it would still take at least 3, or even more than 5 years, to rebuild a conquest fleet. Whether it's building warships or training sailors, neither is a simple matter. But Faceac clearly doesn't have that much time. Since they launched the war, they must be eager to win in the shortest possible time. Some Faceac general even boasted that they would occupy the entire Loan Kingdom within a month. Faceac couldn't wait 3 years, let alone 5, they couldn't even wait 3 months. And the Loan Kingdom doesn't even need 3 months, they only need 3 weeks to take advantage of the conquest fleet's weakness, completely annihilate the landed Faceac troops, and the Intersea fleet can even take the opportunity to move north. By then, whether it's attacking Faceac's coastal ports or supporting the Amantha defense line to the east, the Loan Kingdom will have the final say. And the Faceac can only watch, completely helpless. For the Loan Kingdom, this is undoubtedly a good thing. However, Moon Aemlin silently averted his gaze from Justice Audrey. That battle lasted less than a minute from start to finish. And within that minute, Justice Audrey killed tens of thousands of people from the entire conquest fleet. That was tens of thousands of people. Even if it were tens of thousands of pigs, it wouldn't be easy to kill them all at once. Hanged Man Alger's eyes flickered. He had actually imagined what he would do in such a situation. With the power of the cataclysmic Interer, combined with the blessing of the Sea God Scepter, he could summon a lightning storm covering hundreds of meters. Within the range of this Beyonder ability, no living creature would survive. And the Faceac fleet wouldn't be as tightly packed as Zongzi. A few hundred meters sounds significant, but on the vast ocean, it's just a drop in the bucket. Such an area would at most gather a dozen warships, or even fewer. In other words, if Alger wanted to destroy the entire fleet manually, he would need to continuously unleash dozens of lightning storms, provided that these fleets remained stationary, neither resisting nor escaping. Clearly, in terms of both efficiency and effect, he was far inferior to Justice Audrey. Of course, Alger wasn't disheartened by this, because he had also considered other members of the Tarot Club. Excluding the 3 above angels, no one else could be as efficient as Justice Audrey. In fact, comparatively, his efficiency was still relatively fast. Hermit Catlia's violet eyes flickered. High-sequence Beyonders of the Spectator pathway were truly terrifying. No wonder Emperor Rosal specifically reminded Queen Mystic to be careful of spectators when teaching her. Audrey, as a dream weaver, noticed the unusual expressions in the other's eyes and smiled lightly. This is a good thing, at least on the Intersea front, the Loan Kingdom no longer needs to worry about the Faceac threat. It's just a pity that the overall situation is still unfavorable to us, so I was thinking, well, we could conduct a few more similar operations. No one was surprised by this suggestion, as they had already been thinking the same thing. The Hanged Man had clearly considered this already, and said, "We don't really need to consider the Intersea side, the Faceac will basically not launch any more active attacks. And the Faceac's Sonia Sea fleet won't take overly aggressive actions in the short term, there isn't a good opportunity to strike. As for the defense line in the Amanda Mountains," the Hanged Man paused slightly, then continued, "we can consider starting from that direction, but it requires thorough planning in advance." As the several people enthusiastically discussed which demigod to hunt, Ember suddenly spoke up. "Once or twice is fine, but don't do it too frequently." "Ah." Justice Audrey blinked. "Son," Derek pondered for a while and asked, "does Mr. Lover mean that we might be targeted because of this?" Ember glanced at him and slowly said, "Not possibly, but certainly. Such a high-profile hunt of demigods belonging to Faceac, especially the main commanders of various battlefields, even if Faceac doesn't know their true identities, they will certainly guess that their stance leans towards the Loan Kingdom. Otherwise, how to explain why they only hunt Faceac demigods, and not Loan Kingdom demigods? If they do this too often, Faceac will definitely bear a grudge. Although Furs is present, they can quickly maneuver using teleportation each time, which prevents the Faceac from catching them in the act or deducing their identities through divination. As long as they can't get a hold of them, Faceac won't be able to affect their lives. But the problem is, as long as they continue to hunt Faceac demigods so openly, the Faceac will definitely take corresponding action, and it's even likely they already have. For example, by directly sending an angel to personally infiltrate and lie in wait beside a demigod who is a main commander. As soon as they show up, that angel can capture them all in one fell swoop. And if an angel truly takes action personally, then even if Audrey and the others combined, they wouldn't last a second, unable to even send out a distress signal. I think so too. The Star Leonard pondered for a long time before voicing his thoughts. At times, the Nighthawks also have to take aggressive action to dismantle the Beyonder gatherings of wild Beyonders and arrest all participants. But as soon as such a thing happens, the news quickly spreads throughout Backland. Even those wild beyonders who have already been under surveillance will vanish during this period, and no one will be able to find them. This is simply because they cannot resist, so they can only hide far away. But if it were those secret organizations, like the Aurora Order cultists, they would proactively set traps to ambush us. What we need to do now is actually the same. Magician Furs analyzed seriously. The Faceac Empire will find it difficult to organize large-scale offensives from the Sonia Sea and Intersea directions in the short term. The pressure on the Loan Kingdom will be much less, and indeed, there's no need for overly frequent actions. That would only make Faceac more vigilant, or even turn around and hunt Loan demigods. Hanged Man Alger thought for a moment and also said, "It's indeed not suitable to continue targeting Faceac in the near future." Judgment Zio suddenly suggested, "Then have you considered starting with Intis?" Hanged Man's expression was a little strange. He glanced at the hermit, Ms. opposite him. Theoretically, it was possible. After all, the Fosac people were vigilant because they had suffered losses, but Intis had not. However, the problem was that they chose to target the Faceac Empire's demigods partly because Faceac posed a significant threat, and partly because none of them had any connections or even positive feelings towards Faceac. But Intis was different. Hermit, Ms. was a native Intis person, and the Queen Mystic, behind her, who had already become an angel, was also an Intis person. Although they had both left Intis, one couldn't expect them to strike at their former homeland, could they? After all, putting himself in their shoes, even Alger himself, though he had no strong allegiance to the Storm Church, would still hesitate and have some scruples if he were to strike at the Storm Church. And, Judgment, Miss, is it really appropriate for you to suggest hunting Intis demigods in front of Hermit, Ms. right now? Perhaps sensing what Hanged Man was thinking, Hermit Catlia proactively said, "I think it's fine." At this, everyone else's expressions became somewhat subtle. Chapter 372, Fenboot. The Fool Klein, seated at the head, glanced at the Hermit Catlia and thoughtfully mused. "It seems Miss the Hermit doesn't have many pleasant memories in Intis." The Hermit Catlia immediately understood what the others were thinking from their expressions. She is an Intis native, and Queen Mystic, her backer, is also an Intis native, so theoretically their stance should naturally lean towards Intis. However, this is not the case. Although Queen Mystic is an Intis native, and her father, Emperor Rosal, was even the founder of the Intis Republic, the current Intis Republic is considered a continuation of the Intis Republic established by Emperor Rosal, similar to the relationship between the First French Republic and the Second French Republic. Therefore, in many people's eyes, Queen Mystic Bernadette should resolutely uphold the system of the Intis Republic, as this is the only legacy her father left for Intis. But in reality, Queen Mystic's attitude towards Intis is very ambiguous. Although she frequently returns to Intis, to Trier, there is nothing left there that she cherishes. The reason she returns to Trier is not much different from the reason she appears in Backland. And among the high-ranking officials of the Intis Republic, Catlia couldn't even find anyone related to Emperor Rosal, neither his own descendants nor the descendants of his friends, not a single one. Such a country, though bearing the name of the Intis Republic, holds no bonds worth Queen Mystic's attachment. As for the Orthodox churches in the Intis Republic, there is even less reason for Queen Mystic to help them. Because, in the end, the reason Emperor Rosal fell in the White Maple Palace was that he was assassinated by the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, the former Intis royal family Sorin family, and other nobles in a joint effort. Even if Emperor Rosal was almost insane in his later years, and even if Bernadette had disappointedly left her father, this did not mean she could calmly accept her father's death or forgive the forces that had killed her father. The Eternal Blazing Sun Church was like this, and the Steam Church was also like this. The former participated in or even orchestrated her father's assassination, while the latter turned a blind eye, clearly acting as an accomplice. Moreover, during Emperor Rosal's lifetime, he expressed his dissatisfaction with the Steam Church to Bernadette more than once. Because his second son, Bonneva, had his soul influenced by the god of steam and machinery, causing his divinity to overpower his humanity. For ordinary people, they would consider this a blessing. But for Emperor Rosal, this was a threat from the Steam Church. Bonneva was the hostage chosen by the Steam Church. Emperor Rosal could not confide his feelings to anyone except Bernadette, but precisely because of this, Bernadette was very clear that Emperor Rosal's attitude towards the Steam Church was not friendly. And as his daughter, Bernadette was naturally inevitably influenced. Although her younger brother Bonneva is now in the Steam Church, and has even become a Sequence 2 angel, this has only intensified Bernadette's hostility and vigilance towards the Steam Church. In other words, from top to bottom, from the state to religion, there is nothing in the entire Intis Republic worth Bernadette's attachment. Although she is an Intis native, she has no good feelings for the current Intis Republic whatsoever. Even if the country were to perish, she would not feel a trace of sadness. And just as Bernadette was deeply influenced by Emperor Rosal, she was adopted by Queen Mystic when she was less than 3 years old and grew up by her side ever since. Bernadette taught and nurtured her, and she, in turn, was deeply influenced by Bernadette. For Catlia, Bernadette is her teacher, and even more so, her mother. She can unhesitatingly dedicate everything to Bernadette, but for Intis, she truly has no special emotions. Of course, she holds the same stance towards the Ruined Kingdom. However, since most members of the Tarot Club are from the Ruined Kingdom, she doesn't mind standing with the Ruined Kingdom and hunting the demigods of the Intis Republic alongside them. After all, for now, her regard for the Tarot Club is second only to Queen Mystic, and even the Moses Ascetic Order, which she is currently part of, ranks lower, despite her now being one of the 10 pillars of the Moses Ascetic Order, a true high-ranking member. But if one day she had to betray the Moses Ascetic Order, Catlia would not hesitate. If Hanged Man Alger was the first to break the silent atmosphere, and he said with a serious expression, "If we are to target the demigods of the Intis Republic, we need to gather enough intelligence in that regard and then formulate a new plan." The hermit Catlia showed no discomfort and calmly stated, "The composition of Intis's demigods is more complex than Faceax. On one hand, the former royal family, the Sorin family, controlled the Hunter pathway. When the Sorin family was overthrown, Beyonders of the Hunter pathway were the most numerous in the nascent Intis Republic. Even today, many members of the Sorin family hold high positions in the government, so Intis has no shortage of iron-blooded knights and war bishops from the Hunter pathway. And I believe you don't need me to introduce the abilities of Hunter pathway Beyonders any further. In addition, the demigods of the Eternal Blazing Sun Church are mostly unshadowed and justice mentors. For the Beyonder abilities of this pathway, Sun should be able to provide us with sufficient advice. As for the demigods of the Steam Church, they are mostly alchemists and arcane scholars. Demigods of this pathway can infuse souls into the items they create, giving them a certain life, refining puppets, and creating a body that will not age. Therefore, most of the time, they appear in the public eye in the form of puppets, and if one wants to hunt a demigod of this pathway, one must first find their true body. This will be very difficult, so if we are to take action against the Intis Republic, I do not recommend choosing a demigod of the Steam Church as the target." The hermit Catlia meticulously detailed the strengths and weaknesses of the demigods from various pathways in the Intis Republic, ultimately concluding with the guiding principle of prioritizing Hunter pathway demigods, followed by the Eternal Blazing Sun, and then the Steam Church. On one hand, Hunter pathway demigods provide the greatest boost to warfare, and hunting them can maximize benefits. On the other hand, Hunter pathway Beyonders are also the easiest to hunt. As long as their connection to the military is severed, they are like lambs to the slaughter. And among the members of the Tarot Club, they have more than one way to sever this connection, and possess relevant professional experience. And the hermit's attitude completely dispelled the doubts of others. It was clear that Miss the Hermit indeed had no attachment to Intis. This meant they would have no qualms when hunting the demigods of the Intis Republic. Miss Justice is actually a passionate youth. The fool Klein sighed inwardly. Their current actions were all aimed at helping the Ruined Kingdom resist foreign invaders, which was a good thing for both themselves and the Ruined Kingdom. It's just a pity that, limited by their current sequence, their vision cannot reach higher levels, so they cannot understand the deeper essence of this war. On the surface, their actions delayed the offensives of the Intis Republic and the Faceac Empire, buying precious buffer time for the Ruined Kingdom to better cope with the two countries' attacks and reduce the Ruined Kingdom's losses. But from a long-term perspective, this might not necessarily be a good thing. Because to truly end the war, a divine war must break out as soon as possible. And the prerequisite for a divine war to break out is that one side can no longer maintain the stalemate in the war and faces national annihilation. At that point, the gods of the weaker side will have to rise up in resistance, and the gods of the stronger side will choose this moment to deliver a fatal blow to the opponent. And the longer the war drags on, the more distant the outbreak of a divine war will become, and casualties will only continue to escalate with each successive battle. The fool Klein thoughtfully cast his gaze towards Justice. Miss Justice might understand the essence of this war, but she clearly cannot easily accept it, nor can she stand by idly, even if she knows that what she is doing might ultimately be futile. So, this is Miss Justice. Klein sighed in his heart. He had actually anticipated the choices of the Tarot Club members long ago. And he could actually, as the fool, call off their actions, but he wouldn't. Because he had no reason to do so, nor the standing. After all, at the root of it, he is also a Ruin native. His family and friends are also in Ruin. Miss Justice's efforts might ultimately be futile in terms of the outcome, but it cannot be said that their actions are meaningless. Moreover, Klein's peripheral vision caught Ember. The outbreak of a divine war might not be as distant as he imagined, perhaps it would break out very soon, provided Ember could free his hands. Everyone. Justice Audrey raised her hand slightly and, after some deliberation, spoke. If possible, I hope to commission you to help acquire some grain. The topic shift was so abrupt that many people didn't react immediately. But Hanged Man and the others quickly understood what Miss Justice was thinking. This noble lady might be running a charity foundation, and since the outbreak of the war, she had been engaged in charity work, providing relief to the populace through food. This is very much in line with Miss Justice's character. In the entire Tarot Club, perhaps no one else would do something similar besides her. Magician Furs sighed softly. This was the difference between Miss Justice and them, she shone like an angel. If it were Mr. Hanged Man, not only would he not acquire grain to help the populace, he might even take the opportunity to resell grain and make a fortune from the war, and he might even resell more than just grain, perhaps even weapons. Magician Furs glanced at Hanged Man, who seemed lost in thought across from her, and couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Secretly criticizing others was not a good habit, even if she truly thought that way. Regarding this matter, the hermit Catlia pondered for a moment and then said, I have a suggestion. Justice Audrey's eyes lit up, and she immediately looked at Miss the Hermit with some anticipation. Acquiring large quantities of grain from within ruin is unrealistic. Nobles and wealthy individuals are hoarding grain, and those grain merchants will only seize the opportunity to raise prices. Ordinary people, even if they spend all their savings, won't be able to obtain much grain. If you truly hope to acquire large quantities of grain, it's best to start with Fenboot. Fenboot. Justice Audrey quickly reacted. Before the war broke out, the Fanapotter Kingdom was the most important grain exporter, bar none. This was partly due to the Fanapotter Kingdom's geographical advantage, where the land was fertile and well suited for growing grain. And on the other hand, it was because of the Orthodox Church worshipped in the Fanapotter Kingdom, the Earth Mother Church. Beyonders of the Earth Mother Church are mostly from the planter pathway, with low-sequence beyonders being mostly planters and doctors, and mid-sequence beyonders being harvest priests, biologists, and druids. From these potion names, it can be seen that beyonders of the Earth Mother Church are exceptionally talented in cultivation. They can not only distinguish different seeds and select high-yield ones but also catalyze the growth and reproduction of animals and plants, performing various cross-breeding to increase their yield. Over the past 1,000 years, every large-scale war on the North Continent has proven that while the Fanapotter Kingdom's performance in war might not be very satisfactory, they will never lack grain. Even when the war reached its most intense point, they could still maintain abundant grain production. Coupled with the fact that most of these beyonders are believers of the Earth Mother, grain would also be used by the Earth Mother to aid her believers during wartime, making it rare for people to starve to death. The Ruined Kingdom was even forced to use the corn laws to protect the prices of its domestic agricultural products, not importing grain from southern countries like Fenboot, Masik, and Leuenberg until prices rose to a certain level. Although the purpose of this act was to protect the interests of the nobility, it also indirectly showed the Fanapotter Kingdom's abundant grain production. Before the repeal of the corn laws, the price of an 8-pound rye bread was 15 pence, but within just 2 months of the corn laws' repeal, the import of large quantities of cheap grain from Fenboot caused the price to drop to 9 pence. Justice Audrey's eyes lit up, realizing the feasibility of this suggestion, but then quickly became somewhat dejected. But, I don't have the channels. A major reason for the skyrocketing grain prices in the Ruined Kingdom since the outbreak of the war was that the Fanapotter Kingdom had ceased its grain exports to the Ruined Kingdom due to the war. I can help with smuggling, but the quantity will be limited. The hermit Catlia slowly stated. If you need to acquire a large quantity of low-priced grain, it would be best to personally visit the Fanapotter Kingdom and discuss it with them properly. Chapter 373, You Are Confused. As Justice and others left, the fool returned to quiet, as if the previous gathering was just a phantom. Klein bent his finger and gently tapped the edge of the mottled long table, revealing the partially completed record of the fool's holy words, which Magician Miss had sacrificed. In an indescribable solidification, Klein gazed at the cover of the Gospel with a solemn expression. The 5 large characters, record of the fool's holy words, caused Klein's heart to be somewhat conflicted. Frankly speaking, he absolutely did not want the holy book of his church to have such a name. Whether it was called, Book of the Fool, or, Fool's Holy Scripture, he could accept it, but only the name, Gospel, truly made Klein feel a bit resistant. However, if he were to ask Magician Miss and others to change the name for the sake of merely 3 characters, it would indeed damage the dignity of Fool Mr. But as soon as he saw the 3 words, gospel, Klein's thoughts couldn't help but start to wander. The emperor had 20 sons, and half of them betrayed him. The tarot club has 22 positions. If I remove myself and my alternate identity, there are exactly 20. No, it can't be. It's just a coincidence, yes, just a coincidence. Klein's mouth twitched slightly, he comforted himself, and then forcibly reined in his wandering thoughts. August 14th. The Intis Republic and the Fasak Empire, originally fighting separately, secretly reached an agreement. The Intis Intersea Fleet and the remaining Fasak Conquest Fleet joined forces to form a joint fleet to jointly oppose the Ruined Kingdom's Intersea Fleet. This caused the Ruined Kingdom's Intersea Fleet's original advantage to vanish, returning to a passive defensive stage. August 15th. Under the organization of the Hermit Miss, the Tarot Club members had another collective sightseeing trip. The destination this time was the Honachus Mountains, and as the admission ticket, a war bishop belonging to the Intis Republic paid the price of his life. August 25th. The Fainapotter Kingdom and the Intis Republic's Misty Sea Fleet formed a joint fleet and crossed the Furious Sea, attempting to bomb the port in Dissy Bay. However, en route, they encountered the Ruined Kingdom's patrolling ironclad fleet, and a fierce naval battle erupted between the two sides, with losses on both sides. August 28th. The Intis and Fasak joint forces launched a large-scale landing on Constant, and the fleets of both countries also engaged in fierce naval battles around Constant. September 3rd. Under the cover of the joint fleet, the Fasak and Intis joint forces successfully captured a port in Civilis Shire. The Intersea Fleet and the Ruin Army engaged in a week-long fierce confrontation around the port, but they were unable to retake it. The Fasak and Intis joint forces successfully gained a foothold. September 7th. A key node in the Honachus Mountains defense line was breached by Intis, and the battle became increasingly fierce. September 12th. During a half-month-long landing operation, Intis and Fasak successfully captured the Constant beachhead, and used it to establish a counterattack base with a depth of 17 kilometers. The Ruined Kingdom was forced to go on the defensive, and Fasak and Intis rapidly expanded their gains, with the joint landing force reaching 500,000 soldiers. September 15th. The Intis and Fasak joint forces launched an attack on Constant City, and the Ruined Kingdom urgently dispatched reinforcements. In Backland, Empress Burrow, inside the luxurious Hall family villa. Audrey sat in front of her dressing table, recalling recent events, and couldn't help but purse her lips, her heart filled with complex emotions. Over the past month, the war situation has become increasingly unfavorable for the Ruined Kingdom. The huge losses of the Conquest Fleet forced Fasak to make concessions in its negotiations with Intis, but this did not dispel Fasak's intention to invade. Instead, it promoted cooperation between the two countries. It is imaginable that Intis gained huge benefits in its negotiations with Fasak, which is why it so readily dispatched its entire Intersea Fleet to cooperate with Fasak. The Sonia Sea direction was still alright. The Fasak, Intis, and Fenboot fleets at sea were suppressed by several of Ruin's ironclad fleets, barely able to maneuver and protect their maritime supply lines. And on the Amanda Mountains defense line, with the support of the Church of the Night, Fasak's two-headed giant army had never been able to break through any fortress, and this defense line remained stable. Only the Intersea defense line, under the fierce assault of Intis and Fasak, had gradually fallen into a disadvantage. Perhaps in less than a month, Constant would fall, and the Honachus Mountains would be the same. By then, Fasak and Intis could drive straight in, occupying Civilis Shire and Jonai County while advancing southeast to rendezvous in the Backland region. And once Backland also fell under the attack of the two countries' joint forces, the consequences would be unimaginable. To prevent all this, over the past month, they had organized multiple assassination attempts targeting high-ranking officials of Intis and Fasak, but most of these operations ended in failure. Out of more than 10 assassination attempts, only 2 were successful. This was because the high-ranking officials of both countries had already taken precautions, and each was accompanied by multiple Beyonders of different pathways. This also meant that unless the Tarot Club could kill all these Beyonders at the same time, as long as any one of them had a chance to call for help from an angel, the Tarot Club's assassination would inevitably end in failure. Audrey actually understood in her heart that what they could do was already close to their limit. No matter how hard they tried, all they could do was hunt down a few more Beyonders, but that would have minimal impact on the war. Because the war would not end until both countries exhausted their national strength. Only a divine war could change all this. And whether a divine war would break out would not change according to their will. Audrey inevitably felt somewhat dejected, but this did not mean she gave up trying. Audrey's emerald eyes flickered, and she couldn't help but think. The food smuggled by the Hermit Miss has almost been consumed. If I want to obtain more food, I can only personally go to the Fanfic kingdom and talk to those merchants who sell food. Although she said, talk, it wasn't a literal conversation. To gain higher profits, those merchants wouldn't mind taking the risk of treason to sell grain to the ruined kingdom. But the selling price would certainly not be the lowest price, it would be double or even several times the original price. This is not surprising, after all, the nature of these merchants is to seek profit. If the profit is not high enough, why would they take such risks? If those merchants are too excessive, the price of smuggling grain from the Fanfic kingdom might even be higher than the price of purchasing it domestically. In this situation, Audrey was well aware that the effect of negotiations would be very limited. So she knew that what the hermit miss meant by talk was to use the Beyander abilities of the spectator pathway to negotiate. With the strength of a Beyander, she could easily hypnotize those grain merchants and buy the grain at a lower price. But this also carried risks, because the Fanfic kingdom would definitely send people to monitor these grain merchants. Smuggling a small amount of grain would be fine, but if too many grain merchants were controlled, and the scale was too large, it would inevitably alert the church and the authorities. The authorities might even send Beyonders to investigate. However, she could read Lemonou's travel notes from Magician Miss. With the Beyander ability of travel in hand, she wouldn't have to worry about being caught even if discovered. The voice of the demoness echoed in her ear. You seem to be troubled. Audrey came back to her senses, turned her head to look at the lady who had suddenly appeared in the room, dressed in a black long dress and calling herself the jealousy demoness, and said with a complex tone. Karula, in your world, in Lordran, have there been wars like the current one? Karula looked at the young girl with some surprise, her voice softening slightly as she softly said. You should have learned about it in the dream world, haven't you? The wars that broke out in Lordran were only more numerous and larger in scale than those in this world. The Sun King led his knights to launch the dragon hunting war, ending the rule of the immortal ancient dragons. The ancient dragons clan was thus extinguished, with only a few creatures carrying ancient dragons' bloodline remaining. Overlord Wolnir also conquered various nations, treading through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Believe me, the slaughter he caused far exceeded your imagination. The dream world is ultimately just a small fragment, not enough to depict that vast world. Lordran is the land of gods, but that is not the entirety of the world. Beyond Lordran, there is Baldur, there is Drangolic. And in any world, humans are the same creatures. Regardless of their essence, regardless of the threats they face, conflict is inevitable, and war is also inevitable. So, you don't need to feel confused about this. No, I am not confused. Audrey blinked, and said softly. She wasn't confused, she just needed to confide. But clearly, Karula wasn't a very good listener. Karula's expression stiffened slightly, and she immediately straightened her face, enunciating each word. No, you are very confused right now. I am a dream weaver. Audrey said seriously, I know I'm not confused. A Beyander of the spectator pathway can fully perceive a person's inner thoughts through changes on their mind island. Similarly, they can also perceive their own inner thoughts, confront their every idea, and correct any potential errors and weaknesses. Therefore, even losing control and corruption are merely a kind of mental illness for the spectator pathway, and are completely curable. Under such a premise, how could Audrey not know her own thoughts? She wasn't confused, nor did she regret her choice, it was just that her emotions sometimes became difficult to control, making her sentimental. Audrey was a bit helpless, she was just speaking from the heart, hoping to confide in Karula. But as a dream weaver, it seemed even Karula couldn't easily see through her. Of course, this was also because Karula hadn't used her Beyander abilities. Karula seemed to dislike the feeling of arbitrarily prying into others' minds with Beyander abilities, so she had been trying her best to avoid using them. Yes, Audrey didn't like it either. After experiencing so many things, she increasingly understood a truth. Beyonders in the spiritual domain must learn to restrain themselves and respect others. If, even when they can interpret others' true thoughts from body language, facial expressions, and emotional fluctuations in everyday life, they still greedily explore others' inner worlds, digging for privacy and secrets, it may eventually backfire on themselves. This is a very simple truth. Everyone, more or less, has some dark, bad thoughts, but they control them well and don't let them affect their behavior. In such a situation, if Beyonders in the spiritual domain still insist on digging into these thoughts, digging into the ugly parts beneath the mask, it will be very easy for them to become disappointed in human nature, to be infected by various negative emotions, and gradually go mad without realizing it. This is one of the reasons why Spectator, despite being able to soothe themselves and treat relevant psychological problems, still tend to become perverted or insane. They are both safe and dangerous. Therefore, the code of conduct Audrey set for herself was to only observe and read minds of acquaintances, trying not to enter their dreams. For strangers, there were no restrictions on entering their dreams, but unless necessary, she would not enter anyone's spiritual world. Karula, on the other hand, was even stricter. She even omitted the process of mind reading, mostly only performing the most superficial observation. This was something Audrey couldn't do. It wasn't that she craved mind reading so much, it was simply because it had become her instinct. Just as humans cannot stop breathing, she, too, could not stop mind reading now. Karula could do it because she was an angel, while Audrey was only a Sequence 3 Dreamweaver. However, even when Audrey reiterated that she was not confused, Karula still said seriously, "That's because you are so confused that you don't even know you are confused." Huh. Audrey tilted her head. So, was Karula angry? Was she angry because she had rarely wanted to comfort her, but then discovered that she didn't seem to need comfort? Audrey was a bit strange, because from her experience with Karula wasn't the type who liked to comfort others. On the contrary, she enjoyed teasing people. So, why would she suddenly want to comfort herself? Was it because her displayed confusion stirred up the softness in her heart, making her recall warm memories from the past? When Karula was confused, perhaps someone else had once gently comforted her like this, leading her out of her predicament. So, Karula was touched by the scene and tried to imitate her past self to comfort her, right? She was moved to sympathy by her own experiences, and so she tried to comfort her. But this comfort was mercilessly rejected, and in the other party's eyes, it even seemed like mockery. Well, putting herself in that position, even Audrey would probably be a little displeased. But even so, it shouldn't be enough to make her angry, right? Karula is a Sequence 2 angel. Is she really that easily angered? No way, no way. The Dreamweaver's instinct allowed Audrey to subconsciously analyze the truth of the matter, and she couldn't help but inwardly grumble. P.S. Recently, while reading descriptions of Dark Souls items, I suddenly discovered a few more things. For example, the Lord of Cinder. Open black lens bracket the remnant Lord of Cinder of Prince Lothric. If the Lord of Cinder refuses to return to the throne, then just bring the Lord of Cinder back. Lothric excessively pursued heirs connected by blood, and eventually deviated from common sense, falling to an unsightly degree. It is sufficient proof that transferring fire is a cursed path. Close black lens bracket. Lothric's queen is the Sun Princess, which is beyond doubt. And the person she first married was fire god Farum, and according to some hidden statement, fire god Farum died in the war to seal Overlord Wolnir. The person who later inherited the throne of Lothric was Demon King Osiros. And from the texts, excessively pursued heirs connected by blood, Demon King Osiros is likely the son of fire god Farum and the Sun Princess. After the fire god's death, the Demon King inherited his father's throne, and to ensure the continuation of the bloodline connection, he married his own mother. The King of Lothric kept changing, but the Queen of Lothric remained the same. Besides that, I can't remember where I saw a theory that Prince Lorien is actually the son of Prince Lothric and the Sun Princess. It sounds a bit outlandish, but it's actually quite reasonable. Chapter 374 Time. In the captain's cabin of the future on the Rorstad Archipelago Sea. Katlia opened her eyes from meditation, her purple eyes filled with deep worry and surprise. As a highly publicized secret organization, everyone knew that the Aurora Order members were lunatics. However, this madness was not due to their inherent disposition, but because the pathway they followed was the secret supplicant pathway. Any Beyander of the secret supplicant pathway would perceive certain mysterious and terrifying existences. And once they advanced to Sequence 8 feet listener, they would directly hear whispers from the true creator, further being polluted by him. It was precisely because of the influence of the true creator that Beyonders of this pathway often experienced distorted cognitive views and were prone to losing control. Therefore, for official Beyonders, any Beyander of the secret supplicant pathway was a potential criminal. They received completely different treatment from other wild Beyonders. Once discovered, they would definitely be captured or even eliminated on the spot by official Beyonders. Compared to Beyonders of the secret supplicant pathway, the mystery prior pathway was better, but only a little. Because just as Beyonders of the secret supplicant pathway would hear the true creator's ravings, Beyonders of the mystery prior pathway would inevitably be influenced by the high sequence existence of the mystery prior pathway, the hidden sage. In the earliest existing secret organization, the Moses Ascetic Order controlled the mystery prior pathway. Initially, the Moses Ascetic Order believed in a non-personified deity, which was the hidden sage. This was described as a deity, but it was closer to an idea, a natural law, such as all things are numbers, and the hidden sage was the embodiment of spiritual numbers. For example, knowledge is supreme, and the hidden sage was knowledge itself. Therefore, the early Moses ascetic order was a very respected organization and had good relations with the major churches. But one day, the deity worshipped by the Moses ascetic order, the hidden sage, came to life. He became a personified evil god. From that day on, just like the true creator who loved to instill ravings in his believers, the living hidden sage was also keen on instilling knowledge into beyonders of the mystery prior pathway. But for most beyonders, this knowledge was more like poison, a poison named pollution. Emperor Rosal once said, "It is not that we pursue knowledge, but that knowledge pursues us." The hidden sage is knowledge itself. He pursues us, pursues every Moses ascetic order member. When a lot of knowledge is poured in but cannot be quickly digested and mastered, there are only two situations: either let go of your mental defenses and accept the hidden sage's transformation, or rely on willpower to endure. If you cannot endure, you will lose control. As long as one is a beyonder of the mystery prior pathway, no one can escape this predicament of being pursued by knowledge. Whether it is a sequence 9 feet mystery prior, or a sequence 5 feet constellations master, no beyonder of the mystery prior pathway can avoid the fate of being pursued by knowledge. Even Katlia, who had now advanced to sequence 4 feet mysticologist, and was already a demigod, could not avoid it. She was once tormented by the hidden sage's pursuit of knowledge, almost losing control, and it was Mr. Fool who saved her. Now that she had become a demigod, she could initially resist the knowledge instilled by the hidden sage. This resistance was not a complete rejection of knowledge. Even as a demigod, it was difficult for her to refuse a deity's gift. Instead, it meant that she could initially accommodate and understand this knowledge, preventing it from becoming poison. As long as she did not actively pray to the hidden sage for knowledge, the knowledge that merely passively pursued her would not have much impact on her. But no matter what, the pursuit of knowledge would never stop. Only when she went to the Fool would this knowledge temporarily cease its pursuit of her due to the obstruction of Mr. Fool's divine kingdom. But now, the situation had suddenly changed. Because since last week, Katlia had not been able to sense the pursuit of knowledge. The hidden sage, who was keen on instilling knowledge into all beyonders of the mystery prior pathway, suddenly stopped instilling knowledge into them, as if he had vanished without a trace in an instant. Katlia did not understand what this change meant, and she was not even sure if it was a good thing. Although the hidden sage stopping his installation of knowledge could free her from the risk of losing control and prevent her from having to expend a large amount of energy every day to digest this knowledge as before, lest knowledge accumulate into a poison that would make her lose control. But Katlia always had an ominous premonition. To her, this was more like the calm before a storm. The hidden sage's temporary disappearance did not necessarily mean liberation, it was more likely a precursor to destruction. As a living deity, the hidden sage's essence was influenced by the first Moses ascetic order, meaning knowledge pursues people. As long as the hidden sage was alive, he would not stop instilling knowledge into beyonders of the mystery prior pathway. In the current situation where the hidden sage suddenly disappeared and no longer pursued beyonders of the mystery prior pathway, there were only two possibilities. Either the hidden sage had fallen, so he could no longer pursue others. But a deity could not fall silently. When he fell, his power would be unleashed without reservation upon the entire world, and everyone, especially beyonders of the same pathway, would sense it. However, Katlia did not have a similar feeling, so it could only be the second possibility. The hidden sage was trying to impact a higher level, so he temporarily stopped pursuing others. Katlia knew very well that the hidden sage was not a true deity, he was closer to a king of angels with uniqueness, like Adam and Amen before. And if he were to impact a higher level, it could only be the throne of a true god, sequence 0. The hidden sage is about to advance to sequence 0. A crazy thought emerged in Katlia's mind, and fear uncontrollably surged into her heart. Just being the king of angels, the hidden sage, almost made her lose control. What if he became a sequence 0 true god? Moreover, the hidden sage had existed for thousands of years, and in the past thousands of years, he had shown no signs of advancement. Why now? What did this mean? Katlia dared not think further. She immediately chanted the Fool's honorific name, informing that great existence of her conjecture. Above the Fool, Klein, who had listened to the hermit M's prayer, was somewhat surprised. Is the hidden sage going to become a god? He was absolutely certain that the hidden sage was not a true god. Because Emperor Rosal, over 100 years ago, followed the paragon pathway, but because the pinnacle of the paragon pathway, sequence 0 feet, was already occupied by the god of steam and machinery, he had to switch to an adjacent pathway, which was the hermit pathway, and advance to sequence 1 foot knowledge emperor. But because Rosal was not confident in hunting the hidden sage, coupled with the pollution he suffered when he went to the moon, he had to take the risk of switching to the black emperor pathway. So at that time, Rosal had 1 sequence 1 foot knowledge emperor, Beander characteristic, 3 sequence 1 foot prince of abolition, Beander characteristics, and the black emperor pathway's uniqueness within him. And since Emperor Rosal ultimately fell in White Maple Palace, these Beander characteristics would most likely end up in the hands of the Steam Church and the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, theoretically. Any adjacent pathway was beneficial for low and mid-sequence Beyonders, as they could freely switch between adjacent pathways. But for those at the pinnacle of adjacent pathways, there was only one kind of relationship between them, unending conflict. The Evernight Goddess and the God of Combat were like this, and so were the Lord of Storms, the Eternal Blazing Sun, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, Adam, and the True Creator. So, without a doubt, the Lord of Steam, and the Hidden Sage, as adjacent pathways, would also be no exception. Therefore, if that sequence 1 foot knowledge emperor, Beander characteristic was in the hands of the Steam Church, then the Lord of Steam would absolutely not give this Beander characteristic to the Hidden Sage. This would be blatant aid to the enemy. The Hidden Sage, not yet a god, was already causing the Lord of Steam a headache. What would happen if the Hidden Sage became a sequence 0 true god? So before this, the Hidden Sage would at most only be a king of angels with uniqueness and 2 knowledge emperor, Beander characteristics. As long as he could not obtain that last knowledge emperor, Beander characteristic, he was destined to never become a god. And if that last knowledge emperor, Beander characteristic was in the hands of the Steam Church, the Lord of Steam would even risk losing control to try and accommodate this last Beander characteristic, rather than giving it to the Hidden Sage. Even if the Lord of Steam had the idea of casting a long line to catch a big fish, and place the Knowledge Emperor, Beander characteristic in the Steam Church to lure the Hidden Sage to snatch it, this would inevitably cause a huge commotion and could not be without any reaction. But the problem was, since the Hidden Sage was preparing to become a god, it meant that he must have already obtained the last Knowledge Emperor, Beander characteristic. So where did his Beander characteristic come from? Dissecting all the information, Klein quickly locked onto the answer. Twilight Hermit Order, Adam. Klein took a deep breath, he should have thought of it earlier. After Rosal's death, his Beander characteristics should theoretically have been obtained by the Eternal Blazing Sun Church and the Steam Church. After all, the early bird gets the worm. But the situation with George III showed that this was not the case. The 3 Prince of Abolition, Beander characteristics and the Black Emperor uniqueness that George III obtained were clearly provided by the Twilight Hermit Order, by Adam. This was enough to show that the Twilight Hermit Order also had a hand in Rosal's fall, at least they took Rosal's Beander characteristics at the last moment. And since even the uniqueness of the Black Emperor pathway was in the hands of the Twilight Hermit Order, the Knowledge Emperor, Beander characteristic would naturally be no exception. This could explain where the Hidden Sage got the last sequence 1 Beander characteristic. Adam gave it to him. And since Adam had already resumed his actions, it meant that he had now become a god. Only by becoming a sequence 0 true god could he begin a new round of schemes without any scruples. And the Hidden Sage might be the key to his new round of schemes. As the incarnation of the far ancient, Adam was not isolated among the gods, at least he could be said to be a lone wolf. The Eternal Blazing Sun, the Lord of Storms, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, naturally, there was no need to say more, they had an unending conflict with Adam. And the Evernight Goddess and the Earth Mother also had far from harmonious relations with Adam. Even the God of Combat, even if he launched a war with Adam's help, this could at most be considered mutual utilization, not a firm alliance. Even the True Creator, who was also an incarnation of the far ancient, was not friendly towards Adam. Their fusion was destined, but neither side would give up control after the fusion, and the True Creator also had Ember's support, so Adam's chances of winning were very small. So even though Adam had become a god, he was not in a hurry to merge with the True Creator, but was trying to cultivate his own allies. And without a doubt, the Hidden Sage was the most suitable candidate. Firstly, the Hidden Sage was only one step away from Sequence 0, and Adam could completely help him cross this last step. Secondly, the Hidden Sage was also a lone wolf, and their alliance would be very close. Of course, it was also possible that all of this was Adam's calculation. His purpose in cultivating the Hidden Sage might be to allow Aemon to replace him in the Hidden Sage's God Ascension ritual. But no matter what, the purpose of cultivating allies remained unchanged. Although Klein felt that whether Aemon was more reliable than the hidden sage was a highly debatable matter, Adam clearly had his own plans. And if it was indeed the latter, then Klein would have to make plans early. After all, if Aemon became a god before him, the other party would likely try to seize Saphira Castle. Although Saphira Castle had Ember, it was foolproof. But Adam would definitely anticipate this and lure Ember away in advance, which was not difficult, as Adam also had the first fire. At that time, Klein could only rely on his own strength to guard Saphira Castle. Therefore, advancing to Sequence 0 before Aemon was a very necessary thing to do. The perfection of Utopia is nearing its end, and I will soon be able to advance to Sequence 1. Next, as long as the Holy Scripture is completed, coupled with the cooperation of a certain true God's church, the Sequence 0 ritual will not be a problem. In comparison, whether the hidden sage is going to become a god or Aemon is going to become a god, the premise is that the hidden sage first prepares his god ascension ritual. But from the current situation, the hidden sage should still be digesting that knowledge Emperor Beander characteristic. Even if Adam and Aemon are helping to prepare the ritual, it will take a long time. So, at least for now, time is still ample. Chapter 375 because it's interesting. Finepotter City, the capital of the Fainapotter Kingdom. A luxurious carriage traveled on the city's paved roads. The driver's seat was empty, seemingly unmanned, yet the carriage neither suddenly veered onto the sidewalk nor crashed into carriages and newsboys that suddenly appeared from around corners. Its movement was exceptionally smooth. Inside the carriage, a blonde girl in an elegant beige dress observed the hurrying pedestrians through the glass window and softly murmured. It's completely different from Lowen. Since the outbreak of war, the ruined kingdom had long ago implemented a food rationing system, where each person received a fixed, insufficient amount of food daily. While the wealthy and nobles could stockpile large quantities of food and not worry about sustenance, most ordinary people struggled to barely survive. This made the streets of Backland appear particularly desolate, with many commoners waiting for relief, often gathering around relief points before dawn, hoping to obtain some meager food. And on the once prosperous streets of Hillston District and Sherwood Borough, the sight of hurried crowds rushing to work had become rare. Because at the moment the war broke out, most of the so-called middle class had already lost their jobs and had to seek new employment in factories, docks, and other places to support their families, even if their meager wages were barely enough to support themselves. But Finepotter City was entirely different. This metropolis, as renowned as Backland, still retained a prosperity comparable to Backland before the war. Even though the war had been ongoing for several months, the city's prosperity remained undiminished, seemingly unaffected by the conflict. Being in this city even gave Audrey the illusion that she had returned to Backland a few months ago. Although this was partly due to the Fainapotter Kingdom's war targets being only smaller nations like Siegel and Leuenberg, a larger reason was attributable to the Earth Mother Church. If not for the Earth Mother Church making the Fainapotter Kingdom's grain output several times that of other countries, they would not have been able to sustain the capital's prosperity during wartime. The lady opposite Audrey, dressed in a black gown, rested her chin in her hand and lazily said, "We're almost there. I suggest you put on your mask now." Audrey looked down at the mask beside her. It was a cold, grayish-white mask with two eyes shifted upwards, fixed at the forehead, as if only looking at heights and caring for nothing else, giving a feeling that was both comical, grotesque, and subtly unsettling. That was the personality mask named Pride, which could be considered a special mystical item. And on Karula's face, opposite her, was also a mask named Lust. The style of that mask was similar to Pride, except its eyes were different from ordinary people's. They were sunk into the middle of the bridge of the nose, as if looking up at people from below. Audrey was silent for 2 seconds, then put the cold, grayish-white mask on her face. Almost instantly, she felt a virtual personality added to her mental island. This did not come from external sources, but was an amplification and extremization of her own certain cognitions. They are poorly educated and must be guided by me to make the right choices. Not everyone possesses sufficient wisdom, on the contrary, most people are quite foolish. Those workers act on impulse rather than reason, they are easily enticed by small benefits and are short-sighted. Only if I think, I guide, and I decide, can they be saved. They are worthy of pity, but not of communication. Quote. These thoughts echoed in Audrey's mind, making her almost believe them to be truth, as they were part of the feedback she had received during her previous observations and experiences, not fabricated out of thin air. Audrey fell silent for a moment, then spoke in a low voice after several seconds. "Is this Pride?" Karula said with a smile. "You recover much faster than I expected." Audrey looked up, calmly gazing at the lady opposite her, without answering. "What are you thinking?" Karula frowned slightly and asked. Audrey observed her for a few seconds, then said very seriously. "I'm wondering if your mind is full of lewd thoughts right now." Karula's expression froze for a moment, but she quickly resumed her smiling demeanor. "It seems you are more affected by pride than I imagined. Is this also pride?" Audrey blinked, asking with a somewhat innocent tone. Karula was about to speak but suddenly looked to her side. Noticing Karula's gaze, Audrey's expression shifted slightly, and she immediately followed her gaze. There was nothing there, but as Audrey's attention focused on that spot, the scene before the girl's eyes changed. She saw a lady whose face was covered by a mask. The mask's eyes were tightly closed, and its mouth naturally drooped, giving the impression that the wearer was sleeping. That was the personality mask Nemedisloth. The lady wore a simple white dress, with long silver hair and snow-white skin, looking like an elf in winter. She wore no shoes or socks, her snow-white feet bare, treading on the soft carpet laid inside the carriage. Lady Sloth. Audrey observed this lady, feeling an inexplicable sense of familiarity. But she did not ask, instead turning her gaze to Karula opposite her. They both wore masks belonging to the Psychology Alchemists Evaluator group. The masks would affect everything about them, but could also enhance their abilities, both concealing their identity and serving as a symbol of it. Since Karula had them both wear masks, she clearly did not wish for them to meet face to face. Karula narrowed her eyes slightly, greeting with a smile. "Priscilla, long time no see." Audrey's expression was a little subtle, this was not what had been agreed upon. Moreover, the name Priscilla sounded very familiar to her. In her dreams. Or rather, in the dream world constructed by Karula. Before Sun King Gwyn went to transferring fire, he had 4 publicly known children. His eldest son, the banished son, his second son Gwendolyn, who inherited the God King position, son Princess, Gwyn Avelia, and his youngest daughter Filianor. But in fact, Gwyn had far more than these 4 children. There were also 2 forbidden children unknown to outsiders, the half-dragon girl Priscilla and Yorshka, who was also a half-dragon girl. Priscilla's father was one of the 4 original lords, and her mother was the only remaining ancient dragon without scales, Seath the Scaleless. She was the product of Seath the Scaleless's forbidden experiments, possessing characteristics of both god and dragon, naturally endowed with the power to cut down all gods. But precisely because of this, from the moment she gained consciousness, she had been imprisoned by Gwyn in the painting world. This was a form of imprisonment, but also a protection. Imprisoning her was to prevent her from affecting the rule of the gods and the reputation of Sun King Gwyn. But at the same time, this could also protect her from Seath the Scaleless's experiments. It was precisely because of the unfulfilled desire for Priscilla that, under Seath's conspiracy, the girl named Yorshka was born. Audrey recalled the records related to Priscilla in her dreams, a sudden surge of emotion in her heart. Although she had long known that the dream world was not just an ordinary dream, and that the characters within it had truly existed. Yet, when a character from her dreams appeared in reality, she couldn't help but feel somewhat complex emotions. Especially the unique nature of this girl named Priscilla, as the offspring of a white dragon and a god, although she was a scaleless half-dragon girl, unlike her mother, Seath the Scaleless, she inherited the immortal characteristic originating from the ancient dragons. This was not a miracle, rather, it was precisely what Seath the Scaleless desired. He hoped to find a glimmer of hope for immortality from his descendants. And Priscilla's appearance undoubtedly confirmed the success of Seath the Scaleless's forbidden experiment. But under Gwyn's protection, Priscilla disappeared from reality. Seath the Scaleless could not ascertain her whereabouts, and naturally could not research this daughter, ultimately having to pin his hopes on other things. Lady Sloth gazed quietly at Karula and asked softly, "If you're going to call my name, why do you still want me to wear a mask?" Karula's lips curled slightly. "Don't you think it's interesting?" The lady named Priscilla looked at her quietly. After a while, she took off the mask on her face, revealing the delicate features beneath. She was an exceptionally beautiful lady, but Audrey's focus was elsewhere. Her face was very white, extremely white. Despite being excessively pale, it didn't feel sickly, but rather very pure. This adjective might not be perfectly apt, but it was Audrey's first thought upon seeing Priscilla's true face. After thinking for a moment, Audrey also reached out and took off her mask, even though she had only just put it on. Seeing the lady named Priscilla observing her, Audrey said softly, "Hello, I'm Audrey." The lady softly replied, "Priscilla, you should know me." Audrey responded somewhat reservedly, "Yes, Lady Priscilla, I have seen records related to you in the dream world." Priscilla looked up in some confusion and asked doubtfully, "Just records? Huh?" Audrey blinked. What else? Priscilla saw the girl's confusion and gently explained. The dream world was constructed by me and Karula and the others together. Quote. Audrey's gaze turned to Karula, her eyes subtle. So she had always felt a bit strange. Although Karula was powerful, she was after all only a Sequence 2, and a recently advanced Sequence 2 at that. Audrey hadn't suspected anything when she was at a lower sequence, but when Audrey advanced to Sequence 3 and re-entered the dream world, she had already begun to doubt the veracity of Karula's words, because the sheer scale of that dream world was clearly far beyond a Sequence 2. The strength of those Lord of Cinders alone was comparable to an angel, and some even surpassed angels, reaching the Sequence 0 level. Such a complete world would not be surprising even if it were said to be the masterpiece of a god. But could a Sequence 2 truly accomplish such a feat? And now the answer was obvious. The dream world was indeed constructed by Karula, but not solely by her. It involved the efforts of many others, including Priscilla, and many other beings from Lordran. It was through the collective efforts of these outer deity survivors that they recreated the world they once lived in. Priscilla saw the girl's thoughts and also noticed her gaze towards Karula, immediately understanding everything. But she didn't say much. Anyway, she had no intention of taking credit for this matter, only Karula would have such a boring idea. What are you looking for? Priscilla looked at Audrey, who was gazing behind her with an exploratory look. Audrey was startled, her pretty face slightly flushed, as her thought was a bit impolite. She was looking for a tail, a dragon tail. In fact, Priscilla was, well, smaller than she had imagined. After all, the deities in the dream world were much taller than ordinary people, and as a hybrid of god and ancient dragon, Priscilla was also described as tall in records, much taller than ordinary deities. But at least the girl she saw now was no different from a normal person. This might be due to the Beander characteristic, because theoretically, Priscilla's original form was also a mythical creature form, and it was understandable that as a Beander, she could freely control it. Of course, it was also possible that the girl appearing before her was not her true body, but an illusion created with her Beander ability. That's why Audrey was curious about that tail, wondering if it was still there. As a Beander of the spectator pathway, it was actually very simple to see into the mind of the person opposite. And even if they didn't use their Beander abilities, their spectator instinct would lead them to observe and thus guess what the other person was thinking. And that was the case with Priscilla. She saw Audrey's flickering eyes and realized her purpose. But she didn't mind, and a section of tail extended from behind her. The tail was not as thick as a conventional dragon tail. Instead, it was slender and small like a cat's tail, and scaleless. Audrey's eyes lit up, but soon she heard Priscilla's clear voice. "You didn't come here for this, did you?" "I'm sorry, I was impolite." Audrey's pretty face flushed. "Oh Audrey, how could you be so impolite? You're already a Sequence 3 demigod, why can't you even control your simplest emotions? You could already do that freely when you were at Sequence 7. As expected, still the same." Karula clicked her tongue and muttered in a voice everyone could hear. "That's why I hate being with you. Pure to an impossible degree, even able to influence those around her, completely opposite to a dark spawn. Deities did not possess such abilities, so this might come from the ancient dragons, or perhaps from Priscilla herself. But regardless, Karula disliked it. Chapter 376, Riding a Donkey to Find a Horse. Finepotter City, Earth Mother Church Headquarters. A lady in a white dress with icy skin and jade-like complexion entered the bustling church, walking through the grand prayer hall as if strolling in a leisurely garden, until a figure blocked her way at the front porch. It was an old man with slightly curly black hair, a high nose, deep-set eyes, and dressed in a brown archbishop's robe. That was Archbishop Loretto of the Earth Mother Church. He stood by the window, blocking most of the light spilling in from outside. The old man bowed with the Earth Mother Church's etiquette, respectfully saying, "Good day, Your Grace Priscilla." Priscilla looked at the old man blocking her way and said softly, "I want to see Roland." Archbishop Loretto still smiled and replied, "The matriarch has been waiting for a long time. Your Grace Priscilla, please follow me." Almost without stopping, the two went all the way to the back of the church and entered a quiet reading room. In the reading room, a lady with shoulder-length green hair sat at a table, holding a holy book of the Earth Mother Church, meticulously studying every word. "Matriarch, Your Grace Priscilla has come to visit." Loretto stopped not far from the green-haired lady, respectfully saying, "The internal systems of the major churches are largely similar, but there are significant differences in the titles of the Triple Crown. In the Storm Church, the Triple Crown is the Pope. In the Church of the Night, the Triple Crown is the Pontiff. In the Church of the God of War, the Triple Crown is the Grand Patriarch. And in the Steam Church, influenced by Emperor Rosal, its triple-crowned has been renamed the Great Sage. The reason it's triple-crowned as the Great Sage is not only because of Emperor Rosal's mischievousness, but more importantly, because it is to some extent a theft of the symbol of the hidden sage. In the Earth Mother Church, its triple-crowned is usually called the Pontiff. Within the church, believers usually refer to her as the Matriarch Roland. The green-haired lady slightly raised her head. Her gaze met Loretto, who was respectfully standing not far away, and then quickly passed over Loretto, settling on Priscilla, who was dressed in a white dress and resembled an ice elf. "Good day, Your Grace Priscilla," she greeted with a smile. Loretto respectfully backed out of the reading room, not forgetting to thoughtfully close the door for them as he left. Priscilla walked to the opposite side of the green-haired lady, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Priscilla glanced at the holy book in her hand and suddenly asked, "How long has it been since you received an oracle from the Earth Mother?" Roland closed the holy book and said calmly, "The Mother God's revelations are in her holy book, in those doctrines. Anything beyond that is heresy." "You'd better truly believe that," Priscilla said softly, her words seemingly implying something else. Roland was not displeased by Priscilla's offense, but merely smiled at her. Priscilla said no more, simply placing a holy book on the table and pushing it towards Roland. "Fool." Roland looked at the holy book titled, Record of the Fool's Holy Words, on the cover, her eyes filled with surprise and confusion. Priscilla explained concisely, "Using this gospel as a blueprint, rewrite the content related to the creation myth in the Earth Mother Holy Book." After a pause, she added, "This is the Mother God's oracle." Roland's eyes flickered. She opened the Record of the Fool's Holy Words, and read the content about first fire creation, murmuring in a low voice. Content related to the creation myth. The difficulty of the oracle was not great, it merely replaced the creator with the first fire, which would not cause too much impact on the Earth Mother Church's faith itself. The only problem might be that Roland herself had not received the Mother God's oracle. Roland's expression shifted, as if she had come to a realization. If this had happened in another church, people might suspect Priscilla was faking an oracle. But in the Earth Mother Church, this occurrence seemed perfectly reasonable. Because in the Earth Mother Church, there is a not-so-secret taboo. Whether it's a cleric of the church or a believer of the Earth Mother. Anyone who claims to have received divine revelation is considered to have been tempted by a demon, without exception. The official explanation is that in this world, there are many evil existences who impersonate deities, mislead clerics, and deceive believers. And because the two main pathways of the Earth Mother Church are related to life, they are more severely affected than other churches. From time to time, people go astray, attempt forbidden life experiments, and gradually fall. To curb this trend, the Earth Mother Church, guided by the Mother God's will, reorganized the church very early on and established the two major systems of God-blessed and God-favored. God-blessed refers to clerics within the Earth and Moon pathways who receive the Mother God's favor, while God-favored refers to those from outside, from other pathways, who are favored by the Mother God. The latter are less affected by demons and evil gods and can help the former distinguish the authenticity of oracles. Under such a premise, even an edict issued by the pontiff must be countersigned by at least one God-favored, otherwise it can be considered invalid. Conversely, if an oracle of the Mother God is proclaimed by a God-favored, it can even be issued without the pontiff's consent. And if the pontiff receives a completely different oracle from the Mother God, the oracle received by the God-favored will still take precedence, and the pontiff herself will be suspected of having been corrupted by an evil god. Therefore, facing the oracle conveyed by Priscilla, a God-favored, Pontiff Roland had almost no doubts. Roland closed the Record of the Fool's Holy Words, and said solemnly, "I will give the order. All existing holy books should be replaced within a month." Priscilla shook her head gently upon hearing this, and under Roland's puzzled gaze, she said softly, "The compilation work can begin immediately, but the replacement can be implemented after the war ends." Roland reminded, "The war might still take a long time to end." "It won't be too long." Priscilla's tone was calm. Roland remained silent. This might also be an oracle from the Mother God, but unfortunately, she had not received it. "Good." Roland nodded silently. "One more thing," Priscilla said softly. "I have a friend from the Ruined Kingdom who needs a batch of grain." Roland's expression remained unchanged upon hearing the words Ruined Kingdom, and she nodded gently. "Understood. I'll assign Loretto to handle this." The Fainapotter Kingdom and the Ruined Kingdom were at war, and selling any supplies to the Ruined Kingdom at this time would be an act of treason. However, for Roland, these matters were meaningless. Because she is an angel, the pontiff of the Earth Mother Church. Inside a luxurious villa in Finepotter City, Audrey blinked. That's all it takes? Karula asked with a smile. How complicated did you think it would be? Audrey remained silent. With the ability of an angel, obtaining some grain was, of course, a very easy matter. Even she, a demigod, could easily do it. However, Priscilla personally went to speak with the pontiff of the Earth Mother Church. Did that pontiff just compromise like that? Or did they reach some secret agreement? Was all of this really just for some grain? Audrey immediately dismissed the thought that popped into her head. This matter was definitely not as simple as it appeared on the surface. It's highly likely that Priscilla already had some connection with the Earth Mother Church, and the grain she requested might just be an extra. And what Priscilla discussed with the pontiff of the Earth Mother Church was probably related to Karula. She should have thought of it earlier. Although Karula was always idle, this angel was not so idle as to specifically accompany her to Fenboot. After all, purchasing grain was ultimately her private act, and it was only to satisfy her own moral needs. For Karula and Priscilla, who had lived long enough, the morals she upheld might not be important at all. If so, why would Karula need to accompany her to Fenboot? Undoubtedly, Karula came here for her own purposes, and helping her was just a side effect. But when did the Earth Mother Church establish contact with them? And did the Church of the God of War, an ally of the Earth Mother Church, know about this? The matter became increasingly confusing, and Audrey's mood grew heavier. Because she suddenly realized that the judgments she had made based on her own understanding were likely all wrong. Backland, West District, inside the Odra family's villa. Emlyn White stepped out of his carriage, looked at the sun obscured by clouds and mist, and put on his semi-tall silk top hat. On his way to the villa, he gently turned the ring on his left hand, as if to signify his identity. The ring was translucent, as if made of pale red amber, with a blood-red gem embedded at the top. It was the reward Emlyn had received long ago, Lilith's ring. It was a ring personally crafted by the progenitor in ancient times. Although it contained no divinity, it possessed very powerful and magical abilities. After becoming a demigod, Emlyn could, to some extent, suppress the bloodlust that came with this ring. He only needed to drink 3 vials of human blood daily to avoid the corresponding negative effects. Therefore, to demonstrate his special status as a favored one of the progenitor, he began to wear this ring long-term. Emlyn stepped through the gate, walking with his head held high towards the owner of the house, Casimir Odra, a middle-aged gentleman-like man, a sanguine viscount who had recently been promoted. For sanguine, with an average lifespan exceeding 500 years, Casimir, who was only over 200 years old and already a viscount, could be considered a young talent, especially since his grandfather was Count Nabay. And considering that Count Nabay was already old, in another 200 or 300 years, he might have the opportunity to inherit Count Nabay's Beander characteristic position. However, that was hundreds of years later. And now, Casimir looked at Emlyn, who walked proudly towards him, his expression somewhat complicated as he lowered his head and spoke softly. "Good day, Your Grace Count." Emlyn looked straight ahead and nodded almost imperceptibly. "I need to see Lord Ulmer." Listening to the unceremonious command, Casimir controlled his facial expression, which became even more complex. At over 200 years old, he was already a viscount, considered a young talent among the sanguine, but Emlyn was only in his 40s, yet he was already a count. An existence on the same level as his own grandfather, and he still had at least 1,000 years of life left. It was foreseeable that for the next 1,000 years, he would have to respectfully address him as Your Grace Count every time they met. As soon as he thought of this, Casimir, who had once looked down on Emlyn, found his expression becoming a little difficult to control. Casimir struggled to suppress his emotions, walking ahead to lead Emlyn, and followed the stairs all the way down to the underground area. During this time, Emlyn had consciously removed his top hat. Casimir noticed this detail, his expression still complex. In front of the Duke, Emlyn still showed due respect, but only to the Duke. If he were meeting his own grandfather this time, he probably wouldn't be so polite. Passing through layers of secret doors, Emlyn and Casimir finally arrived in an iron-gray hall. Casimir glanced at the vibrant tomb from afar, then respectfully exited the hall. Leaving only Emlyn. "Your Grace Duke." Emlyn faced the tomb, respectfully handing over the holy book in his hand, saying, "This is the record of the Fool's holy words that Mr. Fool instructed to be compiled. Please take a look." As soon as he finished speaking, the record of the Fool's holy words automatically flew towards the tomb, disappearing into the soil. After a long time, Duke Ulmer's somewhat emotional voice came from the tomb. "You have done well. I have a task for you." "What task?" Emlyn's expression immediately became serious. Ulmer's mellow voice came from the tomb. "Based on the creation myth in this record of the fool's holy words, compile a chronicle for the clan. Emlyn was stunned for a long while, his expression a bit troubled. He, a dignified count, doing such a thing, was it perhaps a bit too? Duke Olmer, the sanguine duke in the tomb, slowly said. This is the progenitor's command. Progenitor. Emlyn's expression immediately became serious, and he said without hesitation. Your Grace Duke, rest assured, it is my duty, and I will not shirk it. Very good. Olmer chuckled. This isn't too difficult. The clan has already compiled a partial draft of the chronicle, only the part about creation needs to be perfected. And what you need to compile is only this part of the content. You can even directly transcribe the content from the Gospel, but the precondition is that the special status of the sanguine must be clarified within it. Additionally, those sanguine who entered the dream world with you can all assist you. The special status of the sanguine. Emlyn's expression was somewhat subtle. If he were to achieve this, the simplest method would be to find a sufficiently noble ancestor for the sanguine. However, in the records of first fire creation, the noble races were none other than the divine race and the demoness race. But the question is, how to connect them with the sanguine. Chapter 377 Kill one first to sacrifice to heaven. Klein's body seemed to split into countless individuals, each with their own preferences, personalities, persistence, and destinies, living in a town called Utopia. These individuals quickly lived out their short lives, and amidst the storm like lightning, they awakened, recognizing their most fundamental identity. He was Joe Mingrui, Klein Moretti, Sherlock Moriarty, Gehrman Sparrow, Dwayne Dantes. A single thing can have many names, but its essence will not change. These people raised their heads, looking towards the infinitely high from the illusory city within the spirit world. They saw illusory, intricate spirit-body threads, and a symbol composed of partial, eyeless eyes, and partial, distorted lines. With this symbol as the core, Klein's figure was outlined, his eyes tightly closed. Own spirit of worms, a bit of Beander characteristic, and individual self-cognitions flew up from the spirit world area corresponding to Utopia, heading towards Klein's slightly illusory body, allowing it to gradually solidify. At this step, there was no longer a clear boundary between Klein's spirit body and his flesh and blood body, it was both integrated and dispersed, in a rather subtle state. That is to say, the spirit body could be equal to the flesh and blood body, and the flesh and blood body could also merge into the spirit body. As long as Klein willed it, he could transform between these two states at any time. Of course, he could also separate the flesh and blood body and the spirit body, each with its own peculiarities. This was merely a thought. 2 seconds later, the reorganization was complete. Klein, floating deep within the spirit world, opened his eyes, his pupils only deep black, devoid of any light. Although it took nearly half a year, the results were gratifying. He had advanced to sequence 1, becoming an attendant of mysteries. Silently, a patch of grayish-white mist emerged behind him. Above the mist was an ancient palace, and inside the palace stood a door stained with some greenish-black, composed of countless illusory, brilliant light spheres. The main body of each light sphere was made of worms, either transparent, segmented, or starlight-like, embracing and intertwining with each other, like creatures from myths and legends. This light door looked merely strange at first glance, but upon closer inspection, one could find that its surrounding environment was dark and shen, as if it were draped in a deep black, hooded robe. Thus, from an overall perspective, it resembled a mysterious figure with unknown oddities hidden beneath its robe. The next second, one slimy, illusory tentacle after another shot out from beneath the mysterious figure's deep black robe. But when Klein looked again, both the mysterious figure and the slimy tentacles had vanished. Before his eyes was still that door, stained with some greenish black, composed of countless light spheres. It was continuously emitting faint grayish-white mist into its surroundings. In just 2 seconds, Klein shifted his gaze from the light door. Klein had always had a guess. Compared to Fool and Error, door might be the most suitable pathway to be the cornerstone, because door and Saphira Castle had a sufficiently high compatibility. Just like when he first met Mr. Door, his mythical form was a human figure collapsed from light spheres, with layers of doors inside his body. And Saphira Castle was also a door composed of countless light spheres. Yes, that light door was the true Saphira Castle. In contrast, the Fool was merely the power leaking from Saphira Castle. And now, the Fool had long since become a sea of flames. The grayish-white mist overflowing from within the door was instantly burned to ashes, turning into grayish-white ember that filled the entire space. This made the entire world still appear grayish-white, even though its essence had long been vastly different. And that door, composed of countless illusory light spheres, was now burning with sparks, like spots, gradually invading deeper. And if one observed more closely, they would find that more than half of the light spheres forming the door had completely transformed into the shape of flames. Whether it was the worms, transparent, segmented, or starlight-like, or the slimy tentacles extending from beneath the hood, or even the anchor itself, all had been forced to burn without their knowledge. And those light spheres that survived and had not been invaded by sparks were desperately squeezing towards the depths of the light door, trying to escape the burning. But the light spheres ultimately could not escape the light door. No matter how strong the light spheres will to survive, their destiny was already sealed. They would be burned to ashes under the flames, forced to burn themselves for the flames. Just like the people of the Lordran world, when the first fire was about to extinguish, when the transferring fire was nearing its end. The entire world, all life born from the flames, was forced to burn their souls, making a final, meager effort for the continuation of the first fire. Even if the first fire was destined to extinguish, even if this outcome was destined to be unchangeable. Klein inexplicably recalled a famous quote from a teacher named Shu. When the entire city is burning, where else can they run? I actually don't have the right to say that. Klein gave a self-deprecating smile. In a sense, he was no different from these light spheres. The difference was that Saphira Castle was being forcibly invaded by the first fire, while he was being forcibly invaded by the primordial one. Klein felt an inexplicable surge of emotion, but all of this happened in an instant. He quickly regained his composure, returned to the bronze long table, and transformed into Mr. Fool, wearing a hood. He looked at the figure seated to the right of the bronze long table and softly said, "The attendant of mysteries potion digested much faster than I expected. The plan can proceed ahead of schedule." Ember thought for a moment and asked, "How much longer will it take?" Mr. Fool, Klein said solemnly. "No more than 3 months. Yes." Although Klein had spent nearly half a year digesting the Miracle Invoker potion and completing the corresponding ritual, he would only need less than 3 months to digest the Attendant of Mysteries potion. The reason he could digest the potion so quickly was actually a lucky accident. Initially, to better mislead the other members of the Tarot Club, he used the all-black eye to create the identity of Mr. World. And the initial positioning of Mr. World was the favored one of the Saphira Castle's owner, directly equivalent to an Attendant of Mysteries. Therefore, Klein had been acting as an Attendant of Mysteries for a long time, and quite successfully. And with the blessing of Saphira Castle, although he had just advanced to Sequence 1 as an angel, he was now considered a King of Angels among King of Angels, very close to the true God rank. In this situation, he did not need to consume extra Attendant of Mysteries Beander characteristic, nor did he need to risk accommodating the full uniqueness. While this could enhance his strength, it would also increase the time required to digest the potion. But as long as he finished digesting the Attendant of Mysteries potion, he could directly concoct and consume the full potion, advancing to Sequence 0 True God. This way, the pressure of digesting those 2 Attendant of Mysteries and full uniqueness would fall upon him as a Sequence 0. It was undoubtedly much easier for a Sequence 0 to digest a potion than a Sequence 1. And he was now only lacking 1 ritual to reach the True God position of Sequence 0. To fool time, history, or fate once. And now, this ritual was already being prepared. And what they were going to fool would not be any one of time, history, or fate, but all of them. Whether it was time, history, or fate, all would have an inseparable connection with the first fire in the ritual. From now on, this world would have no creator, only flames. The entire world would be fooled by them, even true gods were no exception. Ember was silent for a moment, then slowly spoke. "Then we do need to speed up. I will personally take action. Speeding up is necessary, but before that." Klein nodded in agreement, but then pointed to his head, giving a wry smile. "Can you help me make the voices in my head stop?" The moment he advanced to Attendant of Mysteries, he could already hear his whispers in his ears. His intuition told him that the murmurs could not be eliminated. No matter what he tried, no matter where he was, the murmurs would follow him like a shadow. At this moment, Klein felt deep sympathy for Beyonders of the secret supplicant pathway. It was no wonder that Beyonders of this pathway were all lunatics. For them, at lower sequences, facing the murmurs of a true god was even more fatal than an angel like him hearing the murmurs of the primordial one. Ember glanced at him and said, "You know that's impossible. The primordial one was omnipresent. Until the first fire truly replaced him, no one could block the primordial one's murmurs." Even though Saphira Castle had been invaded to the point of near collapse, with hardly any purity belonging to the celestial worthy remaining, this situation would not improve in the slightest. Tisk. Klein had a headache. Of course, he knew all this, but he still couldn't help but complain to his friend. After all, Ember didn't have to worry about the primordial one's murmurs, nor would he suffer the same torment. If he didn't say it, how would Ember know he was suffering? Klein rubbed his sun temple and asked. Anyway, what do we do now? Ember watched him quietly, his tone incredibly calm. God slaying. Quote. Klein raised an eyebrow and asked. Which one? God of combat. The Evernight goddess's pathway and the god of combats were adjacent pathways, and they were in an irreconcilable relationship. Even the current war would ultimately end with a divine war between the Evernight goddess and the god of combat. Ember looked at him deeply and slowly said. More than that, for your ritual to succeed, the mainstream beliefs of this world must all be unified. All unified. Klein's breath hitched. This was incredibly difficult. Klein took a deep breath, his expression solemn. Doesn't that mean, besides the Evernight goddess and the Earth Mother, everyone else is our enemy? The mainstream beliefs of this world were undoubtedly the 7 orthodox deities, and among them, their only confirmed ally was the Evernight goddess. That left a full 5 true gods. Although he believed that with Ember's strength, god-slaying wouldn't be difficult. But such an act would inevitably cause immense upheaval. This might not be a good thing. Not necessarily. Ember's eyes were deep as he said. The God of knowledge and wisdom will not be our enemy, and the Steam Church will not be an obstacle to us. The only real obstacles are the remaining 3. Klein's mind stirred, and he immediately made a connection. Queen Mystic Bernadette had once said that the God of knowledge and wisdom was not Haribergen. He had long since been replaced by another existence in secret, something even other true gods had not discovered. He was not surprised that they would not be an obstacle. But why wouldn't the Steam Church be an obstacle either? Hiss. Klein seemed to suddenly remember something and frowned, asking. Because of Adam. Yes. Ember calmly said. Adam knows very well what he wants, so he knows even better what he should do. In this matter, our interests are aligned. Klein fell silent. Aligned interests were easy to understand. Once the first fire successfully replaced the Creator's position, the Beyonders of this world would no longer have to worry about the risk of the Primordial One's revival. They would be able to completely control their Beyonder characteristic and their destinies. This was true for Klein, for the Evernight goddess, and of course, for Adam. This was a good thing for everyone. So Adam would not stop it, nor was he powerless to stop it, he would only fuel it. Because for Adam, the ultimate outcome might not fall into Ember's hands, he also had an incarnation of the first fire on his side. As for why the Steam Church wouldn't be an obstacle, Klein's expression changed slightly. He suddenly remembered the hidden sage. A sequence 0 true god was powerful, but it was difficult to change the overall situation. For Adam, cultivating an outer deity as an ally was clearly a more cost-effective matter. So Adam actually intended to cultivate the Lord of Steam to become an outer deity. But if that were the case, why would he cultivate the hidden sage? No, that's not right. The hidden sage, upon becoming a god, would certainly pose an obstacle to the Lord of Steam, but what if he couldn't become a god? The hidden sage would hold a god ascension ritual, of course, but this ritual might not succeed. After all, Aemon was still watching in the dark. And how did Ember, located in Saphira Castle, know all of this? That was, of course, through another eye. Ember and the first fire were originally one. Just as Klein could see the locations of Aemon and others through Saphira Castle, Ember could also see Adam's schemes through the perspective of the first fire. Similarly, the reverse was also true. The first fire could also see what was happening on their side, and witness their conversation. Clearly, both sides had a tacit understanding of this. Quote. Klein gradually pieced together the full picture of the events and asked in a deep voice. Who do you plan to strike first? Ember slowly said. The Lord of Storms. Klein was stunned again. He had thought it might be the eternal blazing sun, or the god of combat, but he never expected it to be the Lord of Storms. After all, this one could, to some extent, be a target for alliance, because his relationship with the Evernight goddess was very harmonious. If their relationship wasn't harmonious, they wouldn't have established churches in the same country and coexisted peacefully despite ideological conflicts. To be fair, this act of sacrificing a potential ally first was indeed somewhat beyond Klein's imagination. But soon, he heard Ember add. Or the eternal blazing sun. Chapter 378, This is a Transaction. Sonia C., Rorstad Archipelago waters. The Azure Avenger led a pirate fleet, weaving through the smoke-filled battlefield. Suddenly, a huge fireball flew over from somewhere, and entangled silver-white sharp rays parted the sea, creating a passage that hadn't existed before. Surrounded by the surging waves on both sides, it pointed directly at the Azure Avenger. Alger Wilson, standing at the bow of the ship, raised his right hand with an unchanging expression at this sight. A violent tornado abruptly appeared, sweeping up the azure seawater and the silver-white sharp rays, making them resemble a long snake, rushing straight into the sky, colliding with the huge fireball. Boom! Water splashed, falling like rain. Alger immediately locked onto a warship, opened his mouth, and let out a roar. With a bang, the ship was suddenly lifted into the air by a fierce wave. Seizing this opportunity, the Azure Avengers' broadside cannons fired on their own, a continuous rumble echoing. Seeing that the Beyonder on the enemy warship still intended to use the fireball's recoil to shift the ship sideways, Alger pulled his right hand down sharply. A thick silver-white lightning bolt struck down, scorching the Beyander's body and making him tremble continuously. Boom, boom, boom. Shells hit, and the ship disintegrated directly in midair. Amidst the cheers of the sailors, Alger's expression remained unchanged as he calmly commanded the pirate fleet to pursue the remaining enemy ships. In this war, many pirates were recruited, becoming an effective supplement to the navies of various countries, and this even included some pirate generals. For example, Iceberg Admiral led the Golden Dream, cooperating with the remaining Fursak navy to attack the Fanapotter Kingdom's maritime supply lines in the Misty Sea. Meanwhile, in the Sonia Sea, the battle was even more intense. The Ruined Kingdom dispatched a large number of pirates to infiltrate behind Fursak, extensively disrupting the Fosak's maritime supply lines and even attacking ports. Fursak also contacted pirates on multiple occasions to coordinate their offensives. For instance, they once contacted Star Admiral to jointly raid Byam at night. Unfortunately, that operation ultimately ended with the demise of the Sonia Sea Fleet commander, Yegor Einhorn. Since then, Fursak has never contacted Katlia again. After all, although the Fosak had no evidence to prove the attack was related to Katlia, they dared not trust this pirate general anymore. Conversely, for the Ruined Kingdom, they likewise dared not employ this pirate general. Because Katlia was ultimately an Intis, even though she had long left Intis and become a pirate without nationality, no one could guarantee that she wouldn't suddenly stab the Ruined Kingdom in the back. Therefore, the Ruined Kingdom's strategy had always been to turn a blind eye. As long as these pirate generals didn't cause trouble in the rear, their existence would be ignored. Compared to Katlia, Alger has been thriving recently. On one hand, he was originally an official pirate affiliated with the Storm Church, and thus naturally possessed greater legitimacy than other pirates when conscripted. Therefore, from the very beginning, he obtained a special permit from the Storm Church, commanding the entire pirate fleet to wreak havoc behind the Fosak. Although these pirates were not as disciplined as the regular navy and couldn't follow orders perfectly, attacking fleets had always been their forte. In this regard, the regular army was far inferior to them. Even if the Fosak merchant ships had escorting warships, under the encirclement of numerous pirate ships, they could only sink with regret. However, unfortunately, due to the Storm Church's high-intensity disruption of the Sunia Island maritime supply lines during this period, coupled with the regular army's helplessness against these pirates, it finally led to the intervention of a Fosak Empire demigod. Although Alger intercepted that demigod, the fleet still suffered some losses and had to return to Byam for repairs. After defeating a Fursak fleet that had pursued too deeply, Alger led his fleet into port at dusk. While there was still some light in the sky, Alger disembarked and headed straight for the Wave Cathedral, where Sea King Yarn Cottonman resided. As a Sequence 4 cataclysmic enterer, his strength was already comparable to that of this Storm Church cardinal. However, his advancement neither followed the Storm Church's system nor was it reported to the Storm Church in advance. If exposed rashly, he would only be treated as a traitor. So, on the surface, he was still just a Sequence 5 ocean songster. Yarn Cottonman might have noticed his unusualness, but he was smart enough not to expose it. After all, with the war in full swing and the ruined situation tense, as long as no problems were found, the Storm Church wouldn't mind having another Sequence 4 demigod as cannon fodder. Moreover, this situation was not an isolated case. In the Storm Church's historical records, there were many powerful individuals who became demigods through fortuitous encounters. Two-thirds of them were corrupted by evil spirits and devils, ultimately losing their lives during purification, but one-third passed the trials and became senior deacons or cardinals, and Alger was just one of them. Even if the Storm Church had suspicions, it didn't matter, because Alger had no intention of concealing it, after all. As he was thinking, Alger suddenly stopped and looked at the long queue at the relief station ahead. Among the staff at the relief point, there were half-giants with heights similar to Fosak, and also local indigenous people with brownish-yellow skin. While distributing bread to those queuing for relief, they also handed out small pamphlets. An indigenous person who had already received some bread and was holding a pamphlet walked past Alger from the relief point. Alger glanced briefly, discerning the content on the pamphlet. "I have returned, to forgive the past and redeem you. First commandment, no live sacrifices, no human offerings. Second commandment, do not take my name in vain. Third commandment, have no other gods. Fourth commandment. Love your parents, husband, wife, and children, as you love me. Fifth commandment. Do not commit adultery with others. Sixth commandment. Do not kill the innocent. Seventh commandment. Do not bear false witness, do not frame, do not break covenants. Eighth commandment. Serve me with your heart, not with offerings. Ninth commandment. Those who commit minor evils must first atone, then receive forgiveness. 10th commandment. Helping your fellow man, your companion, is praising my name. Quote. Alger recognized it at a glance. It was a promotional pamphlet for the Fool's Church. As for how he recognized it, naturally, it was because he had participated in compiling this pamphlet. The Rorstad archipelago had been completely colonized by the ruined kingdom for less than 50 years, and before its complete colonization, the indigenous people of the Rorstad archipelago had always worshipped the sea god Cavatua, believing that this deity, often appearing as a giant sea serpent, protected all islands here, preventing them from being swallowed by earthquakes and tsunamis. Now, this belief has been openly abolished, and the Storm Church has been cracking down on heretics. But in reality, how can such a belief, spanning hundreds or thousands of years, be so easily eradicated? Not to mention that the sea god Cavatua is still alive, even occasionally manifesting miracles to his believers. In Biam, Blue Mountain Island, and the Rosade Sea, the indigenous population still constitutes the majority. And among these indigenous people, most of them still believe in the sea god. Even if every 1 or 2 months a group of people were arrested for believing in the sea god and subjected to various extreme punishments, this situation could not be reversed in a short period. In fact, the main pillar of the local resistance in Biam was the sea god's believers. With the rise of the Fool's Church, the sea god's believers gradually began to convert to the Fool's believers, because in the new record of the Fool's holy words, it has been clearly stated that the sea god is Mr. Fool's subordinate deity. Although not all believers can accept the records in the record of the Fool's holy words now, with the sea god personally appearing to preach, no believer would openly express doubt, and some have even begun to try to cooperate with the Fool's believers from the city of Silver and Moon City. These relief points are one such example. In fact, this method of attracting believers through relief is quite common worldwide. However, compared to other secretive organizations, the Fool's Church has a significant advantage in proselytizing. On the one hand, members of the Abraham family, relying on teleportation and the traveler's bag, can obtain large quantities of food from areas with abundant supplies and deliver them to various relief points in a very short time, subsequently distributing them to the public and attracting believers. On the other hand, the tradition of all citizens being Beander in the city of Silver and Moon City also means that this nascent church is actually no less in Beander numbers than the Orthodox churches. And with these Beander as the backbone of various relief points, there is no need to worry about pirates or thugs causing trouble. At the same time, these half-giants also have indigenous people helping with proselytizing, which makes it easier for other local indigenous people to accept. For most ordinary people, their faith is actually far less devout than they imagine. Especially during wartime, many ordinary people face unemployment and hunger. And if merely changing one's faith can provide food, it's not that difficult to accept for many. What's more, the Fool's Church did not force them to change their beliefs, but merely distributed pamphlets along with food, and required them to be able to recite the 10 Commandments from the pamphlet the next time they received relief. And if they were willing to go to the Fool's Church at 16 Phillips to pray, they would receive extra bread, which was a special benefit for the Fool's believers. Undoubtedly, this was a very fair transaction. And for ordinary people, whether to starve while clinging to their original faith or convert to the Fool to get bread, this was not a difficult choice. Praise the Fool. A slender woman, holding her daughter's hand, bit into a hot piece of bread she had just received from the relief point, crying tears of joy. Her daughter also held a piece of bread, extra coated with powdered sugar, but unfortunately, the little girl who hadn't eaten for several days couldn't even savor it, wolfing down the bread as if afraid it would be snatched away. Her mother did the same, standing in place and ravenously eating the bread, clearly not planning to take it home. Alger looked at the woman. Her fair skin indicated she was not a local indigenous person, nor even mixed race. Her clothing was not luxurious but decent, perhaps even considered middle class before the war broke out. But since the war began, many middle-class people have lost their jobs or even gone bankrupt, to the point where even a simple piece of bread is enough to make them sell their bodies. And now, she only needed to sell her faith. This was a good deal. Alger's expression showed no fluctuation, and he didn't even pause as he left the relief point. He passed by Phillips Street and saw the Fool's Church located at 16 Phillips Street. This church was a product of miracle, appearing out of thin air in a golden light under everyone's gaze not long ago, a genuine divine miracle. Half-giant missionaries maintained order inside the church, guiding the praying believers into the grand prayer hall. Although most of these people came for the extra bread, including the mother and daughter who had just left the relief point, this did not dampen the half-giants' enthusiasm. For these half-giants, as long as you are willing to pray to the fool, then we are good friends. Alger withdrew his gaze from the crowd queuing outside the fool's church and silently thought. The fool's church is developing very quickly. At this rate, it won't be long before it grows into a behemoth comparable to the Orthodox churches. Although the Rorstad archipelago is not as vast or populous as the Ruined Kingdom, all the surrounding islands combined are comparable in area to a county in the Ruined Kingdom, with a population of over 10 million, enough to rival small nations like Seagull. And if all these people could be developed into believers of the Fool's Church, it would be enough for Mr. Fool to form a sufficiently stable anchor. Moreover, with the City of Silver, Moon City, and the Abraham family as pillars, the expansion of the Fool's Church would be exceptionally smooth. Firstly, these three parties combined have nearly 10 demigods, enough to serve as archbishops in major dioceses and protect the believers under their jurisdiction. The number of Beander in the Fool's Church is also not inferior to the Orthodox churches, sufficient to form a large number of Beander teams to protect the peace of a region. Furthermore, due to the extremely large number of pathway taken by the Fool's Church Beander, the strength that these Beander can unleash when cooperating with each other is far superior to the single pathway cooperation of the major Orthodox churches. Secondly, there's no need to worry about the construction of churches and other ecclesiastical buildings, just pray to Mr. World. Even the relief bread can be considered a divine miracle from Mr. Fool's angels. Currently, the only obstacle to the Fool's Church's expansion is the Storm Church. The Rorstad archipelago has always been within the Storm Church's sphere of influence. Even the Church of the Night and the Steam Church have been unable to expand their influence here, having only a few churches. Now, the rise of the Fool's Church aims to completely replace the Storm Church's position in the Rorstad archipelago, which obviously cannot be easily accepted by the Storm Church, meaning conflict between the two is almost inevitable. Chapter 379, Ascension. Rorstad Archipelago, Byam, the City of Generosity. In a room high up in the Sea Wave Church, Derek Berg, who stood 2 meters tall, met the Storm Church's cardinal, a senior deacon of the Punishers, and the Sea King, Jarn Cottonman, who was famous across the 5 seas. Jarn Cottonman said indifferently, "Tell me, what do you want?" Derek subconsciously looked at Elder Levia beside him, but she remained unmoved. It had been agreed before they came that this diplomacy would be led by Derek. After all, he was the Fool's Church's archbishop. Derek hesitated for a long time, then deliberated and said, "We come for peace." Peace. Jarn Cottonman, equally tall and robust with hard, deep lines, snorted. The Fool's Church openly proselytizing in the Rorstad archipelago was in itself challenging the Storm Church's authority and shaking its foundation in the area. During this time, these foreigners had done everything they should and shouldn't have done, and now they came to him talking about peace. Derek brought out the prepared statement and sincerely said, "We can help you resist the Fosak invasion, and you can also concentrate your superior forces to defend Pasu Island and other islands. If needed, we can also cooperate with you in counter-attacking Sunia Island." Jarn Cottonman stared at the young man before him, who, despite his great strength, possessed incredibly naive political ideas, and suddenly sneered. "If we withdraw most of our forces, can you defend Byam and the archipelago? If you can't defend it and the combined fleet of Fursak and Fenboot breaks through your defenses, how can you guarantee the interests of the Loan immigrants?" Derek thought for a moment and said seriously, "We have nearly 10 demigods and tens of thousands of Beyonders." Jarn Cottonman remained unmoved. What Derek said was not enough to impress him. In peacetime, the number of demigods in the major Orthodox churches was usually only about 10. But since the outbreak of total war, the upper echelons of the major churches had increased their efforts to cultivate saints, providing a large number of Beander characteristics and Beander materials, allowing many Sequence 5 Beyonders to advance to Sequence 4. For example, the current Storm Church's number of saints had expanded from 10 to nearly 20. In other words, the Fool's Church, as mentioned by Derek, only had half the number of saint-level existences compared to the Storm Church. Undeniably, such a force was indeed strong, but what did it amount to in war? Admittedly, if the Fool's Church were to suddenly attack, they could quickly occupy Blue Mountain Island, where Byam is located, with their 10 demigods and tens of thousands of Beyonders. The Storm Church, mired in the quagmire of war, simply couldn't spare more demigods for support. But so what? Although Jarn Cottonman couldn't stop them from occupying Blue Mountain Island, he could ensure that the Fool's Church would receive an uninhabited dead island. As a Sequence 3 demigod of the Sailor Pathway, as long as a Sequence 2 angel didn't personally intervene, he was virtually invincible at sea. Because he was the Sea King. As the Sea King, even with range limitations, in the sea area under his control, he was a powerful dominator. He could walk freely under the sea, unleash tsunamis at will, cause the sea level to rise, and command marine creatures to fight his lead singers. They could absolutely overpower all demigods of the same level. At sea, no demigod, no pirate king could defeat the Sea King. If the conflict between the two sides truly reached an irreconcilable point, he would have a chance to fight to the death. With his strength, he could completely submerge the entire Blue Mountain Island, turning it into ruins. At that time, everyone on the island would be dragged along to their graves. And the only one who could stop all of this was another Sea King. But it was obvious that the Fool's Church did not have such an existence, and they also could not accept Blue Mountain Island being submerged by sea waves. After all, wasn't the reason the Fool's Church proselytized in Byam precisely for the potential believers on the island? If there were no people, this island would be meaningless. Therefore, both sides must negotiate, and can only negotiate. This is the only way for them to coexist peacefully. Seeing that Derek was slow to get to the point, Lovia sighed and took over the conversation, saying, "We will pray to our Lord, asking him to bless the Rorstad archipelago." The Sea King Yarn Cottonman narrowed his eyes slightly and turned to look at the lady. She wore a black robe embroidered with numerous mysterious purple patterns, and her silver-gray hair was thick but slightly curly. Her face was smooth and fair, her eyebrows and eyes elegant and beautiful, making her appear to be in her early 30s, and her pale gray eyes seemed capable of seeing through souls. It was already common knowledge that the Fool's Church had been extensively proselytizing within the Rorstad archipelago during this period. Even Yarn Cottonman had passively learned a great deal about the Fool's Church. For example, the Fool they believed in was not a false god like Kavatua the sea god, but a genuine deity. He had already confirmed this with Pope Jad II. It was precisely for this reason that the Storm Church had not taken any measures to stop the Fool's Church's proselytization, but rather adopted a tacit approval. At such a critical moment before the outbreak of a divine war, the attitude of an unknown deity became extremely important. Even if they couldn't become friends, they at least had to ensure that the other party wouldn't become an enemy, especially when the other party intended to show goodwill towards them. That's why he patiently negotiated with these two. He was waiting for the other party to proactively mention the Fool. Derek finally came to his senses, took 2 steps back, lowered his head, and chanted the Fool's honorific name. The Fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray mist. The king of yellow and black who holds good fortune. I pray for your help. I pray for your favor. I pray for you to bestow your power and bless the archipelago. Just then, the sky outside suddenly darkened, as if a large number of dark clouds flew in, obscuring the sun. The Sea King Yarn Cottonman turned his head vigilantly, looking out the window, only to see a layer of shadow covering the boundary between the sea and the sky. With his control over the archipelago's waters, the Storm Church's cardinal's mind quickly conjured the overall situation. The Rorstad archipelago, along with the surrounding waters, was enveloped in dense mist, becoming hazy and unreal. A seabird flew by, attempting to land on the harbor cliff, but passed directly through it, unable to perch. The ordinary people within the archipelago continued to live normally, merely feeling that another storm was approaching. Yarn Cottonman's deep blue pupils widened considerably, and he subconsciously looked back at Derek, who claimed to be the Fool's Church's archbishop. His expression was incredibly devout, showing no surprise at the Fool's great power. In Derek's heart, Mr. Fool was almost omnipotent. A few seconds later, the mist dispersed, the shadows receded, and everything in the Rorstad archipelago returned to its previous state. Yarn Cottonman was silent for a few seconds before saying, "I will seriously consider your proposal. I will immediately convene several important individuals in Byam to discuss this matter and give you a reply in an hour." Lovia smiled. "We will patiently await your reply." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, with Derek following behind her. Yarn Cottonman stared intently at the lady's retreating figure. On the back of her robe was embroidered a mysterious symbol, the emblem of the Fool's Church, composed of half a pupilless eye, symbolizing secrecy, and half a twisted line, symbolizing change. Compared to that naive young man, she was clearly more suitable to lead this negotiation. But the truth was, the young man named Derek was the Fool's Church's archbishop. Was it due to the influence of the pathway he took, or were there other reasons? Yarn Cottonman furrowed his brow, pondering in silence, when he suddenly heard a knock at the door. Yarn Cottonman said faintly, "Come in." Alger entered the room and respectfully saluted. "Your Eminence, Cardinal." Yarn Cottonman looked at the meritorious servant who had just returned from the front line and suddenly asked, What do you know about the Fool's Church? Alger's eyes flickered slightly, but he did not look up. Before entering the room, he had already seen Derek and Lovia, the two demigods of the Fool's Church. They had left the room under the guidance of attendants and gone to the reception room to wait. He, on the other hand, had come here to meet the Cardinal. But why would he suddenly ask these questions? He had indeed sailed the Azure Avenger to the city of Silver's port and displayed a close relationship with Derek. This scene was also witnessed by the sailors on board, and given their loyalty to the Storm Church, it was normal for them to report it. However, he had previously rented Lemonoo's travel notes from Miss Magician and used the Beander ability recorded by Miss Justice within it to hypnotize those sailors, so there shouldn't have been any lingering trouble. If so, why would Yarn Cottonman suddenly ask these questions? Alger's mind raced. After a moment of deliberation, he said, "The Fool's Church's believers are mostly from the City of Silver, outside of Byam." As he spoke, he looked up to observe Yarn Cottonman's expression, who nodded slightly, signaling him to continue. "I once visited their port and observed the residents of the City of Silver up close. Most of them are as tall as Fosak, which might be due to the influence of the warrior pathway. And according to their own accounts, they claim to be from the forsaken land of the gods, having come to the New World under the protection of the Fool. The City of Silver is ruled by the 6-member council, composed of 6 demigods. Their chief is a Sequence 3 Silver Knight of the Warrior Pathway. Besides him, there is another Sequence 3 Silver Knight, 2 Sequence 4 Demon Hunters, a Sequence 4 Unshadowed of the Bard Pathway, and a Sequence 4 Black Knight of the Secret Supplicant Pathway. Additionally, there are some residents in the City of Silver whose stature is no different from normal people. They claim to be from Moon City, ruled by 3 archpriests. Among these 3 archpriests, there is a Nightwatcher, an Iron-Blooded Knight, and an Imperative Mage. Furthermore, the Abraham family seems to have some secret ties with the City of Silver. The land used to build the city was purchased with funds from the Abraham family, and the port was also constructed by the Abraham family. And these members of the Abraham family also seem to be believers of the Fool's Church. These 3 factions combined, conservatively estimated, have nearly 10 demigods and tens of thousands of beyonders. Their strength should not be underestimated." Pausing for a moment, Alger continued. "On the way here, I saw the Fool's Church's relief points distributing bread and pamphlets to the people of Byam. They seem to have already started large-scale proselytization in Byam." Yarn Cottonman nodded silently, then suddenly asked, "Then what attitude do you think we should adopt towards them?" Alger deliberated before replying, "It's best not to clash with the Fool's Church, to avoid pushing them towards the Fosak." Such a clearly biased statement was actually very dangerous, but Alger felt it was necessary to take the risk. In fact, his understanding of the Fool's Church went far beyond this. For example, he knew that the City of Silver had 2 sealed artifacts of 0 grade and nearly 10 sealed artifacts of 1 grade, while Moon City also possessed a small number of demigod Beander characteristics that could temporarily be used as 1 grade sealed artifacts, 5 1 grade sealed artifacts, and a large number of potion formulas. For another example, the Abraham family had already cultivated several Sequence 5 Beyonders, and in less than a month, this family would have multiple Sequence 4 secret sorcerers. After all, the Abraham family never lacked Beander characteristics, they simply found it difficult to advance due to the curse. Now that the curse was no longer an issue, the number and quality of Beyonders naturally exploded, not to mention the help of the Dream World, a powerful weapon. The same was true for the City of Silver and Moon City. They had already cultivated a large number of Sequence 5 Beyonders, lacking only Beander characteristics to advance. However, this was also the flaw of the City of Silver and Moon City, because although their current strength was formidable, it was the result of their potential being squeezed dry by the harsh environment of the forsaken land of the gods. Compared to the Storm Church and the Abraham family, they lacked foundation. The Storm Church could cultivate over 10 demigods within a few months of the Total War's outbreak. This was their foundation. The City of Silver and Moon City could not. They had almost no surplus Beander characteristics. Even if those sealed artifacts were pulverized into Beander characteristics, only a very small number of them would be useful. Of course, he wouldn't tell Yarn Cottonman these more specific details. After all, the former could be attributed to the intelligence office's efforts, while the latter was not something ordinary intelligence officers could know. Revealing these things would only serve as evidence against him in the future. Yarn Cottonman heard Alger's analysis, looked at him deeply, and slowly said, "The Storm Church will withdraw from the Rorstad Archipelago. After I leave, you will serve as Cardinal." Chapter 380 Tacit Understanding. Rorstad Archipelago, Byam, the City of Generosity, on the bell tower of the Wave Church. Alger looked towards the distant port. The Storm Church's fleet set sail amidst the sound of steam whistles, carrying the Storm Church's believers to the distant horizon. At the same time, a large number of resistance forces entered the city, taking over various facilities that originally belonged to the colonial government. People ran to tell each other, lining the streets of Byam to welcome them, with lanterns and streamers hung, their faces beaming with joyful smiles. Most of these people were local natives. Compared to the Loan people who colonized and enslaved them, the resistance forces, also natives, were undoubtedly more popular. For them, the entry of the resistance forces did not mean disaster, but rather a symbol of liberation. Just as Alger had this thought, he suddenly heard, tap, 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 footsteps by his ear. Alger turned his head. Behind him stood a middle-aged man. He had soft yellow hair and wore a long robe embroidered with lightning patterns. His name was Science, and he was Alger's former partner. But later, one chose to be a ghost ship captain, continuing to drift at sea, while the other returned to the clergy system. And now, one had become a cardinal of the Rorstad archipelago, while the other had been sent to Byam to serve as a bishop. Alger knew that Science staying here had other special meanings, but he didn't care. Because the moment Yarn Cottonman asked him to stay and be the cardinal, Alger already understood everything. Alger slowly spoke. Do not obstruct the Fool's Church from taking over the church, and try not to conflict with them. Understood. Science said solemnly. Although he didn't know why the Storm Church would withdraw from the Rorstad archipelago and yield it to a little-known Fool's Church, Science knew there must be a secret transaction he was unaware of. He didn't need to know the reason, only to fulfill his mission. Storm believers who are unwilling to leave will routinely come to pray, and the Fool's Church will not hinder them. But stop proselytizing to the locals. All acts of proselytizing must cease. Unless believers actively come to pray, do not do anything extra. Furthermore, have the Storm Church's clergy try to avoid going out. Science frowned, puzzled, and said, is it necessary to go to such an extent? The Fool's Church doesn't seem like the aggressive type. Alger said in a deep voice. I'm not worried about them, I'm worried about the local natives. Science's heart immediately tensed. For the decades that the Rorstad archipelago was colonized by Loan, the Storm Church had been trying to develop local natives into believers. But unfortunately, due to the existence of Cavatua, the sea god, the efficiency of proselytizing had always been low. Although some natives converted to the Storm Church, they were ultimately a minority. Most people still harbored hostility towards the ruined kingdom that colonized them and were full of hatred for the Storm Church that forced them to change their beliefs. Previously, there was absolute power suppression, and these natives dared not openly resist the Storm Church. But now, most of the Storm Church's forces have withdrawn from Byam, and the Fool's Church and the resistance forces have taken over the city. This is likely to allow the suppressed hatred of the local natives to be released, and some extremists among them will try to frantically attack the Storm Church's believers and clergy. Science took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, I will convey the order. Science actually felt a bit annoyed inside. When had the Storm Church ever suffered such grievances? But after all, it was Alger, the cardinal, who gave the order, and what he said was indeed reasonable and for the good of their clergy, so Science couldn't say much. Alger nodded gently, then handed a book to Science. Science glanced at the cover. Record of the Fool's Holy Words. Science's pupils contracted slightly. This was the Holy Scripture of the Fool's Church, why was it in Alger's hands? Alger saw the suspicion in Science's eyes and said, gather all the clergy and have them re-edit the Book of Storms based on the Holy Scripture of the Fool's Church. Science's expression changed drastically, and he said sharply, are you crazy? Giving the Rorstad archipelago to the Fool's Church was the decision of Archbishop Cottonman, an instruction personally given by the Pope. And for the Storm Church, there was actually no substantial loss. During the war, it was already difficult for the Storm Church to take care of the interests of the Rorstad archipelago, not to mention that their proselytizing here had not been smooth. The local natives were very resistant to them, so giving up the Rorstad archipelago now was more beneficial than detrimental to the Storm Church. Although they lost the foundation for long-term establishment in the Rorstad archipelago, they gained the support of the Fool's Church as an ally, and at the same time could consolidate their forces to better defend Passu Island, and even counterattack the Fosak. But what Alger wanted to do was completely different. He actually wanted to revise the Book of Storms. This was undoubtedly shaking the foundation of the Storm Church, an act of absolute apostasy. For a moment, Science even had the thought of dying together with Alger. Facing the somewhat angry Science, Alger's tone remained calm. This is the Pope's instruction. As he spoke, he spread his palm, revealing the object in his hand. It was an emblem, a storm holy emblem composed of symbols such as strong winds, sea waves, and thunder. It contained a sacred and violent aura, and just looking at it gave one an urge to kneel and submit. Science immediately calmed down, because having served at the headquarters, he could clearly recognize the uniqueness of this holy emblem. It contained the power belonging to Pope G II. And this directly confirmed Alger's words. This was the Pope's command. And the Pope himself was the Lord of Storms' spokesperson in the human world, which meant this was a divine oracle personally given by the Lord of Storms. But why would the Lord of Storms issue such a divine oracle? Why would he ask them to do such a thing? And why would it be at such a critical moment when Cottonman and others left the Rorstad archipelago and Alger took over the cardinal position? Could this be a forgery by Alger? No, impossible. Even if Alger was already a Beander, how could he forge an angel's holy emblem? Even if other angels acted, the power they possessed would undoubtedly be completely different from the Pope's, and he wouldn't feel familiar with it. But if not, how else could everything happening now be explained? Science's mind was a tangled mess, various thoughts continuously surfacing in his mind. Seeing Science's silence, Alger sighed almost imperceptibly. Although he had once done things disloyal to the church under Kilangos's coercion, although he had joined the Tarot Club, gradually moving away from the abyss of storms, believing in Mr. Fool, and seeking greater power and authority, and although he had repeatedly betrayed church intelligence and passively resisted certain matters, he still felt that he could be considered a believer of the Lord of Storms. It was precisely because of this that the suspicion from his former friend truly saddened him. Ultimately, Science's faith made him forcefully suppress his uneasy thoughts. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I will convey it to them." Alger was about to speak when he suddenly felt a stir in his heart and cast his gaze towards the sky in the northwest. Where his gaze fell, the sky instantly darkened, layers of dark clouds piled up, and countless silvery white electric snakes leapt out. Many deep blue waves surged high, carried by the wind, rushing towards the clouds, connecting the sky and the sea. At the junction of sea and sky, streaks of light lit up. They were not brilliant, not clear, and had no color, as if composed of a vast amount of illusory things. Praise Mr. Fool. In various parts of Byam, residents of the city of Silver and Moon City, who were taking over the city with the resistance forces, simultaneously stopped. They looked at the anomaly in the sky, muttering to themselves, and pressed their right palms to their left chests. The accompanying resistance forces hesitated slightly, but were soon infected, and praises rose one after another throughout the ranks. Eventually, this infection spread throughout the entire city. Almost all residents, either actively or passively, bowed their heads and devoutly chanted, "Praise Mr. Fool." Above the Fool, Klein, the Fool, saw everything happening in Byam. He heard countless illusory voices emerging from the air, mixing with real praises, surrounding him, fixing him. The effect is better than expected. Klein murmured softly. He had thought it would be difficult to develop all the residents of Byam into his believers, requiring a long period of adaptation. But facts proved that it was far less difficult than imagined. On one hand, there was the foundation of Cavatua, the sea god. On the other hand, there was the assistance of Expelling, the Storm Church, performing miracles to protect the Rorstad archipelago, and distributing relief food. Led by the residents of the city of Silver and Moon City, a huge resonance was ignited throughout Byam, directly making the vast majority of the city's residents his believers. Although more than 99% of them were shallow believers, the type who might believe you today but might convert to other existences tomorrow because other churches offer more relief food. But no matter how shallow a believer, they are still believers. At least in terms of numbers, the Fool's Church already has millions of believers. Although there is still a slight gap compared to the 7 orthodox gods, he has already one big compared to evil gods like the true creator, the primordial demoness, and the bound god, who can only secretly develop believers. However, this was also thanks to the cooperation of the Lord of Storms. If he had not voluntarily given up the interests of the Rorstad archipelago and reached an agreement with the Fool's Church, then the Fool's Church would not have been able to enter Byam so easily, nor would it have gained millions of believers in such a short time. Moreover, his initiative to have Alger compile the Book of Storms actually already indicated his stance. He does not intend to be an enemy of the Fool, nor does he intend to be an enemy of the First Fire. This is actually a bit unusual. Because the Lord of Storms does not know their plans, or rather, does not know the full extent of their plans. Even if the Evernight Goddess and the Lord of Storms have a slightly better relationship, she would not reveal these secrets to him. But the Lord of Storms still made a change, choosing to show goodwill to the Fool, allowing Alger, who was already an open double agent, to preside over the re-editing of the Book of Storms, but without specifying a concrete direction. This was actually giving the initiative to the Fool, allowing him to decide the content. Of course, the Lord of Storms was not without precautions. He had preemptively withdrawn all Storm Church members from Byam, leaving only some clergy from the Wave Church, and these clergy were responsible for the compilation. At the same time, the Fool had already concealed the entire Rorstad archipelago. Outsiders could not enter, and insiders could not leave without permission. And since these people are under the control of the Fool's Church, and the person in charge of the compilation work is a double agent, what content the Book of Storms will present is entirely up to him, the Fool. But at the same time, because Byam is concealed, outsiders will not know what is happening inside, nor will they know that Alger and the others are attempting to re-edit the Book of Storms. As long as no one knows, the impact of re-editing the Book of Storms can be minimized. Even if the Lord of Storms were to regret it later, he could directly, humanely destroy the Wave Church and eliminate all traces. Even if someone were to find clues afterwards, Alger could be made the scapegoat, that he privately forged the holy emblem and deceived other clergy into desecrating the Book of Storms, and it had nothing to do with the Storm Church. Klein sighed in his heart. The Lord of Storms is indeed a smart person. Everyone believes that Beyonders of the Sailor Pathway are irritable and easily angered, often unable to distinguish between a joke and sarcasm. Once their anger erupts, they don't even consider the bigger picture, so few people like to deal with them. And as the pinnacle of this pathway, the tyrant, the Lord of Storms, has always been depicted as a volatile master. For example, in various legends, the Lord of Storms often punishes heretics and traitors with lightning at the slightest provocation. But from the various intelligence Klein has gathered, this Lord of Storms is clearly not as simple as he appears on the surface. If he were truly so volatile and impulsive, he wouldn't have done so many things that contradict his persona. Whether it was the meticulously planned betrayal of the ancient sun god in the third epic, his demand for the Storm Church to remain restrained during the full-scale war, or his act of goodwill towards the Fool in this incident, all of these demonstrate that beneath the Lord of Storms' wild exterior lies a delicate heart. Ember had once met the ancient sun god, and this Lord of Storms was still just a wind angel at the time. Although he had not directly interacted with Ember, he must have discovered some clues during his observation of the ancient sun god. While this was not enough to help him see the full picture of things, it was enough to keep him vigilant. That's why he would consider things more deeply than others, and why he would make these seemingly unreasonable moves now. This is a wolf king-like existence, and the Beyonders of the Storm Church are indeed very similar to space wolves. For example, Alger, the Hanged Man, is the best example. Despite being a Beyonder of the Sailor Pathway, even Klein sometimes feels that he is more like a conspirer of the Hunter Pathway. Klein sighed, then looked at Ember beside him. Since he's so reasonable, it's not good for us to act against him. Ember said indifferently. It's fine, it's all the same. That's true. Klein smiled. The Lord of Storms was very smart and guessed some things, but he wasn't smart enough. His vision was still not broad enough. He hadn't seen through the essence of things. After all, he doesn't know what a Dark Souls is, nor what the First Fire is. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.